Chapter 647. What should we do? Leaning against his car, Jiang Hai looked at the sky and couldn't help but say helplessly. Just now, he and Bernice were chatting, but the two still had to think about the show. Unlike Jiang Hai's indifference, Bernice still had her own ideas. Since she agreed to go on stage and make a show, she would definitely go on stage. But considering that Shinny Clive didn't take her to play, she needed to think of other ways. According to her idea, it was better to go on stage to sing and dance, so after drinking coffee, she said that she was going to shop in the video store. Jiang Hai really didn't have any ideas about these places, so he originally wanted to go back directly. But Bernice said that it was okay to go back, and that he would pick them up in the evening. Considering that it would take an hour to come and go, Jiang Hai wouldn't be able to rest for a long time when he went back. He didn't plan to go back again. But it was also very boring to accompany Bernice to shop in the video store. What should I do? Make a show? Or do a crosstalk? Leaning against the car, Jiang Hai looked at the sky and muttered in a low voice. Hey, why are you here? Just as Jiang Hai was looking at the clouds floating slowly in the sky, suddenly a surprised voice sounded beside him. He looked back and found that the person who called him was no one else but Delia George. As soon as he saw her, Jiang Hai subconsciously wanted to run away, but he really couldn't run away. Because last time, something happened in the bathroom of Hodge Searcy's house, and it wasn't a very good thing. At that time, he was also hot-headed and said that he wanted to integrate into American life, but this didn't mean that he could have no bottom line. Originally, if it was just for Kelly Solon, Jiang Hai might not be so passive, but the problem was that Delia had a boyfriend. Although Jiang Hai was not a good person, he was not a bad person either. So when he saw Delia, he felt that he was somewhat sorry for Baveda Jinarat because he didn't seem to have any deep hatred with him. So since then, Delia sent him some messages, but Jiang Hai only replied at the beginning, telling her that it was not good for them to be like this, so it was better not to contact him. Delia may have also heard Jiang Hai's words, so she didn't contact Jiang Hai after that. But he didn't expect to meet her here. Come to think of it, Winthrop wasn't that big in total. Hey, why are you here? Since they met, Jiang Hai couldn't just turn around and leave, so he asked her with a smile. I came to town to buy these things. Isn't it going to be Christmas soon? I need to decorate it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia couldn't help but smile and lift the bag in her hand, then said with a smile. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also glanced at it. It turned out that she wanted to take some pendants. In the United States, Christmas was a very important event, so if the family had the conditions, a Christmas tree must be made, and it must be a real tree. In the United States, soil erosion was not serious, at least in most places. Their forest vegetation area was extremely high, but they didn't care about some small Christmas trees that weren't very big. If the family had some conditions, they would cut one and go back to decorate it as a Christmas tree. With gifts and colorful lights hanging on it, it looked very festive. As for the type of tree, there was no requirement. Fir, cypress, pine, as long as it was evergreen and in the shape of a pagoda, it would be fine. The things hanging on it were also strange. Some of them were food, little candy, and so on, but there must be a lot of them. There must be carvings. This was the symbol of the United States. Other than that, there were some small toys. Jiang Hai saw a lot of people selling these in town. Oh yes, Christmas dinner. You're also going to attend it, right? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai immediately asked her. Of course, a few girls from our horse farm also came up with a show together, horse riding dance. It's also from the East. My dad just killed him. When she heard Jiang Hai mention the dinner, Delia also said with a smile. Yes, I saw it the first time I saw old George. If your boyfriend dares to treat you badly, your dad will kill him. Haha. But then again, I also signed up to perform, but I don't know what to perform. Look at me. Do I have any advantages? Looking at Delia, Jiang Hai originally walked around in a circle. He was now in a desperate situation, so he asked her if she had any ideas. Your advantages? There are a lot, young, rich, good-looking, and good character. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia said, but the more she said, the darker Jiang Hai's head became. What's the use of saying these things? Ahem, let's say something that can be performed on stage. Do you think it's reliable? Looking at Delia in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously, something that can be performed on stage. Your basketball skills. After a little thought, Delia said with a serious face. Basketball skills? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head. Now his basketball level is indeed like a fantasy novel. There is a fantasy basketball anime in Japan called Kuriko's Basketball. I heard that there are many gay novels on some websites in China, but those things were all fake. They were all nonsense. But with Jiang Hai's current technology, it was a little bit like that. For example, the three-point shot that covers the whole court. As long as he wants, he can throw the basketball into the basket from any position on the basketball court. For example, the absolute defense inside the three-point line. With his speed, his extreme speed is even faster than the ball. Even if he wants to fight a few people, if he only wants to defend inside the three-point line, then he is an invincible existence. Another example is deterrence. As long as he releases his dragon's might, well, it is actually a sense of spiritual energy that can intimidate the enemy. However, as long as he released his spiritual energy, it was very easy for him to make others fall. He could also dribble the ball over pretentiously and then point at his own defender. You will fall down, and then watch me score. Then, the other party would fall down directly, and he would rush to the basket. Now, these abilities that originally only existed in fantasy can be done now. He even tried to dunk from the three-point line when he was at home. This is not a problem at all. Moreover, he can dunk from the three-point line at a 720-degree angle, a windmill dunk at the three-point line, and a switch-hand dunk at the three-point line. Basketball was just a pastime for Jiang Hai last year, but he is not going to touch it this year. If it were not for those two basketball experiences, perhaps he would have passed the elite line by now, and he would not have to struggle so bitterly. Other than basketball, scratching his head, Jiang Hai does not want to play basketball, even if it will intimidate the whole court. Other than basketball, what about Kung Fu? Listening to Jiang Hai, Delia also frowned because she did not know what to say. Other than knowing that Jiang Hai is good at basketball, she really does not know what other abilities Jiang Hai has. Then, her mind turned, and she could not help but think of a rumor. It is said that in the distant East, people there all know how to practice Kung Fu. Jiang Hai is also from Huaxia. If he knows how to practice Kung Fu, perhaps it will be quite eye-catching. Kung Fu. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's brows wrinkled. If it's Kung Fu, then he seems to know some. In addition to the fighting skills that Belle taught him, in fact, Jiang Hai also knows some Kung Fu. He mainly watched Bernice fight. Although Jiang Hai did not learn carefully, with his current brain capacity, as long as he wants to remember, it is not an exaggeration to say that he has a photographic memory. In addition, Azalina seems to know some Kung Fu. When the time comes, she just has to do some routines and so on. This is quite scary. Hey, I really didn't think of this. Thank you very much. This is a good idea. Looking at Delia, Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said resolutely. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia also smiled. She really did not think that Jiang Hai knows Kung Fu. Hi, Delia. But just as Delia wanted to say a few more words to Jiang Hai, a person came down from the driver's seat of a parked Chevrolet in the distance and shouted loudly to Delia. Jiang Hai also knew this person. It was Baveda Darrow. After all, last time, Jiang Hai made him a little cuckolded, so after seeing him, Jiang Hai took the initiative to wave and then nodded. On this side, Baveda didn't know that he was being cuckolded. He called Delia because he saw Delia and Jiang Hai talking too much. Therefore, he took the initiative to call her Delia. But seeing Jiang Hai being so docile, he couldn't help but stare. Then he also nodded to Jiang Hai, but this action was somewhat stiff. Delia also stuck out her tongue at Jiang Hai. Although something that should not have happened between her and Jiang Hai had already made it very clear that he was not going to continue doing this with her. Since Jiang Hai was unreliable, she had to rely on her boyfriend. So she smiled mischievously at Jiang Hai, turned, and ran to the front of the car in the distance. After saying a few words to her boyfriend, she waved to Jiang Hai and went back to decorate her home. After she left, Jiang Hai wanted to go back directly. Now, he finally thought of a solution to his performance problem. He really wanted to go back and learn, but just as he got in the car, he remembered that Bernice, Lilia, Daliana and Marion were waiting for him to drive them back, so he couldn't help but sigh. They sat until around noon, then Bernice returned to the car with a bunch of DVDs. According to her, not only did she want to sing, but she also wanted to dance. She wanted to impress everyone. Jiang Hai just shrugged his shoulders and let her be. Then he went to have lunch with her. Daliana and the others ate with SH-20 Clive. They didn't come back until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Fortunately, the DVDs that Bernice bought were all music videos of singing and dancing. Jiang Hai also accompanied her to watch them for the whole afternoon, so they weren't particularly boring. They were all English songs, but some of the singers were from Europe and America, and some were from Asia. For example, before this, Jiang Hai had always had some prejudice against South Korea. Many of the girl groups there had English specializations. He had to admit that these people really had nothing to do. The money in South Korea wasn't enough for them to earn, and they still wanted to come to America to earn money. However, based on the current situation, there were still a few South Koreans in America who acted in TV dramas and movies. As for singing, it seemed that there was only one Psy Uncle Bird, and he heard that he was about to be unable to make a living. As for the others like Bent Dead Dog, Thizera, and so on, they were all defeated. In fact, according to Jiang Hai's words, if they wanted to develop, the only way was to go to Huaxia. Although he didn't want to say it, that was the real place to earn money. As long as they were beautiful and sexy, there would always be people willing to spend money to listen to them sing and watch them act. Even if he didn't want to admit it, the number of fans in China was really not small. Pulling the topic back, the three girls were very excited when Xiaoya and the others returned. This was their first time performing in a stage play. They heard that they had already found other actors to play the roles of snowmen, reindeers, snow giants, and so on. Now that the roles were confirmed, they still had to come over tomorrow to practice their lines and then rehearse. From today onwards, they would be very busy people. After Jiang Hai drove back to his house, he discussed with everyone. Jiang Hai wanted to learn martial arts from Azalina. He was really prepared to go on stage to perform martial arts. However, to his surprise, Azalina only knew how to kill people and not martial arts. Fortunately, at the crucial moment, there was still Bernice. When she heard that Jiang Hai wanted to go on stage to perform, she said that she would teach Jiang Hai the set of martial arts she knew. As for Bernice, she was still picking songs. The three girls wanted to go to town, but they didn't have a driver. In the end, Azalina took the initiative and said that she would protect them and be their driver. With Azalina around, Jiang Hai would be more at ease. The next day, when Jiang Hai came back from feeding Xiao Xia in the morning, there was only one of the 5 girls left in the house. "Come, get ready. It's time to start training," Bernice said seriously to Jiang Hai with headphones on and music on. "Anytime." Looking at her, Jiang Hai also smiled. Then, he got into her starting position and looked at her with a smile. "Pretty decent. Then let's start. First move, coiling dragon and tiger distance." Seeing that Jiang Hai had assumed the starting position of her set of boxing moves, and it was exactly the same, Bernice couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then she chuckled. It seems that Jiang Hai had secretly learned a lot from her. However, it didn't matter even if he secretly learned. She didn't have any sectarian bias. Now, she wanted to see how much Jiang Hai could learn. Chapter 648. Ding Dong. Ding Dong. Listening to the doorbell, Jiang Hai and Bernice lay on the sofa without moving. After the bell rang 3 times, Bernice kicked Jiang Hai, who was lying on her butt, and signaled him to open the door with her eyes. "Why don't you go?" Seeing her eyes, Jiang Hai picked up a soft French fry, took a bite, and said indifferently, "I'm not wearing a vest. It's a little exposed." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice said confidently. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked up, and sure enough, under the loose t-shirt, something that shouldn't be there appeared in front of his eyes. "Okay." Although unwilling to move, Jiang Hai shook his head helplessly and then stood up. He walked to the door and glanced at the person outside. It was a delivery man, so he put on his mountain lion coat and walked out in the wind and snow outside. Seeing someone coming out of the manor, the delivery man who was ringing the doorbell also stopped. After waiting for about a few minutes, Jiang Hai rode a 4-wheeled motorcycle to the front door. After opening the door, He smiled at the delivery man. "Mr. Jiang, Merry Christmas. This is your package." Seeing that it was Jiang Hai, the delivery man smiled, and then took the initiative to hand over a small thing. Jiang Hai took the large rectangular box and frowned, because he didn't seem to have ordered anything recently. Looking at the words written on it, it only said that it was a musical instrument, which made Jiang Hai a little confused, but the address was correct, and he didn't know who bought it. "Sorry to trouble you." After receiving the package, Jiang Hai checked it and made sure that there was no problem. Then he gave the delivery man a tip of $10. After receiving the tip, the delivery man was very happy. Generally, people would give $1 or $2, or at most $5, but Jiang Hai gave $10. He was indeed a rich man. After receiving the tip, the delivery man nodded excitedly and then drove away in his car. Jiang Hai returned to the villa. Walking into the house, Jiang Hai couldn't help shaking the snow off his body. Although he had only been out for a few minutes, he felt as if he was about to be frozen. Glancing at Bernice, who was still lying on the sofa, Jiang Hai couldn't help but roll his eyes at her. Then he hung his coat on the hanger and walked in with the things. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, Bernice just squinted at him. "You got the things back, what is it?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice said weakly, "I don't know. What musical instrument is written on it?" Listening to Bernice, Jiang Hai shook his head and said, "Oh, it should be Delina's. I heard that there was a broken musical instrument, so she used her pocket money to buy one. What a good child." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice couldn't help but laugh. She is a silly child, using her own money to buy a broken instrument. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at her, then put the things on the sofa next to him, then patted Bernice's leg and habitually lay on Bernice's thigh. "What do you know, this is called collective. Besides, it's not like you can't get it back." Bernice rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai. She didn't understand why Jiang Hai was so stingy when he was so rich. She really couldn't figure it out. However, after listening to her words, Jiang Hai naturally didn't agree, but he didn't say much. If he said more, it would make him seem petty. He continued to lie on Bernice's lap, watching the TV in front of him. The TV was showing Mars Rescue. This was a new Hollywood film this year. There was no love or hatred in the film, and it was full of positive energy. After it was released in the United States on October 2nd, it achieved good box office results. It was said that it had also caused a lot of excitement in China. Many of Jiang Hai's friends have seen this movie, and the effect is quite good. Although Jiang Hai hasn't gone to the cinema to watch it, but now it has been taken off the screen. This is a paid channel, and any movie that is taken off the screen can be watched. Of course, it costs money. However, Jiang Hai has the legendary annual membership, and he doesn't need to pay extra to watch these movies. As for the situation between Jiang Hai and Bernice at this time, it is also a little unclear. Today is already December 20th. And there are still about 4 days before Christmas Eve, which is the Christmas holiday. Jiang Hai has actually stayed at home for more than 10 days. It is only him and Bernice. Jiang Hai is practicing Bernice's martial arts. In fact, it is just for show. With Jiang Hai's brain, it only took him 2 days to remember it. And because he is stronger, his fighting is much better than Bernice's. Even the wind from the punches is quite scary. But Jiang Hai knows that the actual combat, cough, cough, it is just that. If a woman learns it, it is good for self-defense. But if she really encounters an outlaw, then it is not enough. This was the Chinese martial arts that had been castrated. Some of the very sinister moves had all disappeared. Its only function was to strengthen the body and not to fight on the battlefield. Jiang Hai had already learned it in 2 days. After Bernice chose a song, she also practiced dancing at first. Later, she felt that it was too troublesome, so she changed it to singing. After the accompaniment, she has nothing to do, but Xiaoya, Daliana, and Marian are busy every day. Because they were going to perform and cooperate, it was impossible for them to only practice a few times. The most important thing was that these 3 girls were quite excited. For them, being able to show off in front of people was an excellent thing. Jiang Hai didn't need to stop them. So these days, only he and Bernice are at home. Originally, the 2 of them are the kind of people who do not care about trifles. Bernice will stay at home with Jiang Hai every day. Because the 2 of them are bored, They will snatch food, drink, play, and even the sofa and TV. Later, the two of them will stay on the sofa together. Sometimes Bernice will lie in Jiang Hai's arms, and sometimes Jiang Hai will lie on her lap. Maybe because they are too familiar with each other, the two of them do not have anything to be embarrassed about. The two of them maintain this posture while watching the movie. Not long after, the movie is finished. Bernice also sat up and stretched. She has not moved for more than 2 hours. Oh, I finished watching another movie. What should I do? It's so boring. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice bent her leg and said to Jiang Hai with a helpless face. But listening to her words, Jiang Hai is also very helpless because he is also very bored. Yeah, but what should I do? After thinking about it, Jiang Hai looked at the ceiling. He really has nothing fun. Otherwise, let's play 3 Kingdoms. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice said seriously, 3 Kingdoms? Okay. Although he's extremely unconfident about his luck, Jiang Hai thought about it and agreed. Because he is also a little bored, when she heard Jiang Hai say yes, Bernice went upstairs and took out 3 Kingdoms. Then she sat in the living room with Jiang Hai and prepared to play. They are playing a one-on-one mode, also called KOF mode. Each person has 5 cards, and each person chooses 3 cards. After the order is arranged, they start to play until one side has no one left and wins the game. Jiang Hai and Bernice are not playing for the first time. When Jiang Hai is shuffling the cards, Bernice is choosing the generals. Little Ya's set of generals is full of generals. Wind, fire, mountain, forest, special, Big Dipper, Earth Fiend, Asar, divine generals, etc. Of course, there is no need to use divine generals in a one-on-one game, but there are more than 100 cards for generals. After all of them are done, each person is given 5 cards. Jiang Hai picked it up and looked at it, and he couldn't help but frown. How to say it? Heroes are more disgusting. Shu Guanyu, a red card killer, can be said to be the most useless character. Shu Lu Bei can give cards to anyone. If 2 or more cards can recover a bit of health, he can ask people from Shu to help him kill. But in a one-on-one game, what use is it? Give cards to the opponent? Wei Su Chu, when drawing a card, can deal twice the damage this turn, but in a one-on-one game, it is also useless. There's also Huang Gai, Taisher Ci. The specific skills are not written down, but they are all very weak in a one-on-one game. Looking at the cards in his hand, Jiang Hai sighed and chose 3 heroes. But when he saw the opponent's first hero, he was depressed. Jin Ji, one of the bug generals in the 3 Kingdoms. She has the ability to draw cards infinitely at the start of the game. And today, Jiang Hai's bad luck seems to have reached a limit. In the first game, the opponent drew 23 cards, and in the original starting hand, there is a Zhuge repeating crossbow, and then there is no more, and then, after a series of arrows, when her turn was over, Jiang Hai's third person only has 1 drop of health left. Then, she drew 8 cards again. Game over. In fact, sometimes it is that simple. The first loss, the second time Jiang Hai tried again, he still lost. The third time, he still lost. He lost until the 5th time, when Jiang Hai threw the cards in his hand into the deck. Jiang Hai was a little speechless. Ah, you stinky hand, again. Seeing Jiang Hai lose again and again, Bernice was very happy. Come. Do you think I'm afraid of you? After losing again and again, Jiang Hai was also a little angry and shouted loudly. It's not fun to keep playing like this. Why don't we bet something? Seeing that Jiang Hai was going to continue, Bernice said with a smile. Bet on what? Hearing the word bet, Jiang Hai's consciousness came back a little. He is a very careful person. Generally, he doesn't touch things that have the word bet. Just like in Atlantic City, when he entered the casino, he played very carefully. Let's bet. Head flicking? No, you are too strong. Otherwise, whoever loses will have to take off a piece of clothing. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice thought for a moment. Since they're going to play, then let's play more exciting. She doesn't have as much money as Jiang Hai, but it doesn't matter if she loses something else, especially taking off her clothes. Thinking about it makes her a little nervous. Take off my clothes? You can afford to lose. You only have 2 pieces of clothing. Glancing at Bernice opposite him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Don't you only have 3 pieces? Great, let your stinky hand take off a piece. Glancing at Jiang Hai disdainfully, Bernice said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was also angry. Let's bet. I'm not afraid of losing. After the bet was established, the two shuffled the cards again and started playing. But when the cards were in his hand, Jiang Hai was speechless. Sure enough, this time, Jiang Hai lost the game without even seeing the third person on the other side. Take off, take off, take off. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice excitedly cried out. Hearing her cry, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. First, he took off his pants. Fortunately, his clothes were very big. When he took it off, it covered his lower body. Seeing this scene, Bernice couldn't help but give him a thumbs up. But Jiang Hai really did take off one of his clothes. The competition continued. But when the second game started, Jiang Hai began to scratch his head again. His luck didn't seem to improve because of the bet. This time, he lost even more miserably. He didn't even see the second person on the other side of Bernice and lost. This time, he took off his clothes. Now, he only had his small flat top left. Looking at Bernice's smug look, Jiang Hai frowned. I have to think of a way, or I'll be stripped naked like this. Looking at the general cards in his hand, Jiang Hai's eyes suddenly lit up. Perhaps this will work. When Jiang Hai's attention was focused, the cards in his hand seemed to slow down a little. He remembered the order of each card very clearly. It was as if the more than 100 general cards were imprinted in his mind. As he continued to cut the cards, he was able to clearly remember the order of the generals. When he felt this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. After the general cards were handed out, Jiang Hai picked them up and smiled. God of Dual Pound, God of Point Kill Huang Zhong, God of Counter Injury Xiao Qiao, God of Scoundrel Hero Zhao Yun, and Huang Yueying would Nox. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai knew that he would win. On the opposite side, Bernice frowned. Obviously, her cards weren't very good. Let's start. With a happy smile, Jiang Hai picked up the card. It seems that in this game, because the general was good, his luck in the cards was also good. The cards in his hand were not particularly bad. With the general's bravery, Jiang Hai finally used the group of heroes, Zhao Yun, to complete the kill. Yeah, I won. With the first victory in this game, Jiang Hai also cheered loudly. Hey, what are you showing off for? You just won one game, annoying. Bernice shouted when she heard Jiang Hai's words. Then she stood up, and in front of Jiang Hai, she gently bit her lip and then took off her pants under her clothes. Chapter 649. Hey, I'm just joking. You don't have to really take it off. Seeing Bernice throw her pink-laced underwear aside, Jiang Hai panicked a little. He couldn't help but look at her carefully and then glanced outside. If Little Ya and the others come back at this time, it will be troublesome. I admit defeat. If you lose in the last round, I will also strip you naked for sure. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice's fighting spirit continued to rise. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel that he was in a dilemma. Again, looking at Jiang Hai's slightly hesitant look, Bernice shouted and the game continued. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai has mastered the method of cheating. How could Bernice win? Sure enough, the second round ended with Bernice's somewhat pale face. Jiang Hai once again finished with a wave of 3 kills. Damn it! After Bernice finished speaking, she was about to take off her shirt, but Jiang Hai waved his hand to stop her. Forget it. Let's stop here. You lose. Waving his hand, Jiang Hai said to Bernice, What? I can't afford to lose? But Bernice didn't appreciate it. Instead, after glaring at Jiang Hai, she took off her shirt directly. As soon as her shirt was taken off, Bernice appeared in front of Jiang Hai in an instant. Jiang Hai's eyes couldn't help but stare, but he subconsciously avoided it. Bernice's body, how should he say it? She was really beautiful, making Jiang Hai a little embarrassed. However, since the loser was stripped naked, the game was over. Cough. That's it for today. You should put on your clothes. As he said, Jiang Hai stretched out his hand and wanted to pick up the cards. Since the winner has been decided, Jiang Hai can't say anything. No, let's do it again. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice's eyes were red from losing so much. She shouted with a serious face. Cough, forget it. Hearing her voice, Jiang Hai smiled helplessly. What is this? It's clear that I won. okay? No, let's do it again. This time, let's bet. Well, if you win, Aphrodite and the others will live in your room in the future, and I won't care what you do. After thinking about it, Bernice said seriously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's eyebrows couldn't help but raise. This bet can be established. After all, Jiang Hai also needs, but usually when Aphrodite and the others are here, Jiang Hai have no chance to go further because Bernice's eyes is. If she doesn't care about him, then it's good news. Then, let's do it again. Hearing what Bernice said, Jiang Hai took a deep breath. This time, he must win. How was that possible? Of course, when Jiang Hai made up his mind to win, Bernice didn't have any strength left to resist. 10 minutes later, Bernice screamed. She really couldn't believe that she lost so badly. It was another triple kill, and she still hadn't seen who Jiang Hai's second opponent was. You said it. You don't have to care about my business in the future. Looking at Bernice, Jiang Hai said with a smile. For the happiness of his lower body, he has ignored Bernice's exposed parts. But then again, it's not like he hasn't seen these things before. Abominable, abominable, abominable. Let's do it again. Bernice said fiercely as she stopped Jiang Hai from packing up his things. But I don't want to gamble anymore. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai has already gotten what he wanted, and there's no need to play anymore. No, let's do it again. If I win this round, the previous one doesn't count. If I lose, I'll let you do that. Staring at Jiang Hai, Bernice said with a malicious look. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but grin. What the hell is this? I think it's better to forget it. No, I must play. Looking at the tough Bernice in front of him, Jiang Hai sighed. It seems that if he doesn't win this round, she will pester him endlessly. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai nodded. Since she is willing to die, then he is willing to bury her. Of course, Jiang Hai doesn't want to do anything with Bernice. This is not in line with his bottom line. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, he was about to shuffle the cards, but Bernice grabbed the cards first. I'll shuffle the cards, you shuffle these. Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. However, he still shuffled the cards. He doesn't trust his stinky hand, but he can think of a way to get some good cards. Sure enough, after the cards were dealt, Jiang Hai found that 4 of the 5 cards were not suitable for a duel. Bullion Shi, Zhang Liao, Liu Bei, Kai Wenji, and the only suitable one was Huang Zhong. Fortunately, he still had Huang Zhong. This is because he only needed Huang Zhong to play tricks on the cards. As he drew the cards, he attacked first. In the first round of 6 cards, 2 of them were made out of nothing, and 2 of them were made out of plum. In an instant, there were 10 cards. Then, he equipped a crossbow and reduced a horse, and the shameless killing began. How can this be? After 10 minutes, seeing that Huang Zhong still had 1 drop of blood left, but her 3 generals were all dead, Bernice couldn't help but throw away the cards and roar with a face full of anger. This is fate, Okay, quickly pack up and go to sleep. Listening to her roar, Jiang Hai smiled and then packed up his things. This time, Bernice didn't stop Jiang Hai from packing up the cards. It seems that she also admitted defeat. But when Jiang Hai put away the cards, he looked up and saw Bernice looking straight at him. What's wrong? Jiang Hai touched his face and said with a guilty conscience. Did she notice that he cheated? I admit defeat. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Bernice said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but have a look of confusion on his face. Then, he laughed at himself. This little girl is sometimes too serious. That's a joke. Okay, I'm going to take the things back. Waving his hand, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Then he was ready to stand up and put on his clothes and take the cards back to little Ye's room. But before he stood up, Bernice had already pounced on him. In order to prevent Bernice from getting hurt, Jiang Hai didn't use much strength and was pushed to the ground by Bernice. But in front of Bernice's beautiful face, which was only a few centimeters away from him, Jiang Hai was a little confused. You can't be serious, right? It's not like you don't know my situation. I'll harm you. Looking at Bernice's serious expression, Jiang Hai's eyes were a little evasive, and then he whispered to her, but Bernice didn't give Jiang Hai a chance to say more. She lowered her head and kissed Jiang Hai's lips heavily. Her clumsy movements and excessive force let Jiang Hai know that she was not joking. She was serious. But what should he do if she is serious? I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of? About a few minutes later, maybe she felt that Jiang Hai was motionless like a dead fish. Bernice couldn't help but pat Jiang Hai's chest and said fiercely. Then she bit Jiang Hai's ear. Of course, it was not an exaggeration to say that her bite was sucking. In an instant, Jiang Hai took a breath of cold air. The bottom line and the thoughts in his heart that he had been adhering to disappeared at this time. Since he was possessed by the Dragon Balls, Jiang Hai's resistance to temptation has really become worse and worse. His mind has been infected by some of the things inside the Dragon Balls. He didn't know whether his change was good or bad, but judging from Bernice's current direction, this was what she wanted to see. Feeling Jiang Hai's eyes getting redder and redder, and his big hands gradually moving, Bernice kissed Jiang Hai's lips again. After a long time, their lips parted. Jiang Hai turned around and pressed the naked Bernice under his body again. Go to my room. Seeing that Jiang Hai wanted to go further, Bernice did not refuse, but said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai carried Bernice up to her room on the second floor with the last shred of rationality left in his body. Lilia, your outfit today is really beautiful. Pushing open the door of the villa, Daliana said to Lilia with a smile. Yeah, unlike us, we have to play boys. But even if we were to play Princess Elsa, we wouldn't be better than you. You didn't see the way those men looked at you. They were about to swallow you alive. Hee. At this time, Marian, who followed in, also said with a smile. It was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and today's rehearsal had ended half an hour ago. Azalina was now responsible for picking up and dropping off the 3 girls. Because the rehearsal had just ended, they were still wearing their costumes. Daliana was wearing a gray jacket. She was playing the male lead of this stage play. Well, in fact, this play was a women's play, and the male lead was not very outstanding. Marian was playing the prince of the country. He was wearing a set of gorgeous European medieval aristocratic clothes, which really looked like a general attack. As for Xiaoya, who was walking in the middle, her clothes were much more extravagant than theirs. She was wearing a sparkling aqua blue dress. In addition to her special makeup and her originally white hair and face, she really looked like a character from a cartoon that had come alive. She gave off a very fairy-like and ethereal feeling. Not to mention men, even women would feel that she was very beautiful. Didn't Jiang Hai cook today? Hearing the 2 sisters' words, Lilia was somewhat embarrassed, so she decided to change the topic. But when she looked up, she found that Jiang Hai and Bernice, who were supposed to be here, were not here at this time. Where did Jiang Hai and Bernice go? Daliana looked around and asked curiously. Well, there's a sound on the second floor. And just when the 3 girls were in a daze, Azalina, who had parked the car, walked into the room. As soon as she walked in, she also found that Jiang Hai wasn't there. She listened softly and heard a sound on the second floor. Hearing her words, the 3 girls looked at each other, and then the group of 4 sneaked to the second floor. As soon as they walked to the second floor, the sound became more obvious, and it seemed that this wasn't the first time they heard this sound. Among the 4 girls, Daliana, Marian, and Lilia blushed instantly. Then, the group of 4 quietly went to the room where the sound was heard, which was Bernice's room. Looking at the unlocked door, they quietly pushed the door open a gap, and then the scene in front of them caused a huge shock to them. At this moment, the familiar Bernice and Jiang Hai were on the bed in Bernice's room. The 2 of them were hugging each other vertically. Bernice's body was tightly attached to Jiang Hai's body. Her 2 slender legs were wrapped around Jiang Hai's waist, and her 2 arms were also wrapped around Jiang Hai's neck. Her lips were connected to Jiang Hai's lips, and her lower body was constantly moving. Meanwhile, Jiang Hai's big hand was also covering Bernice's back, constantly exerting force. And with each impact of Jiang Hai's, Bernice's nose would let out some sounds that they could hear. At this moment, a puddle of blood had not completely solidified on the bedsheet under them, which meant that the 2 of them had not fought for a long time. At the sight of this scene, Delina, Marian, and Xiaoya were all dumbfounded. Azalina reacted first as she covered Delina's and Marian's eyes. Closely after that, she took the two girls upstairs. After that, she came back upstairs and took Xiaya downstairs. However, the scene just now was still a huge shock to the three girls. Although Daliana and Marian had seen Jiang Hai doing those indescribable things, they didn't expect that he would also do that with Bernice. After all, compared to Bernice, Daliana and Marian were not too familiar with each other. Now that Jiang Hai had already laid his hands on Bernice, would he do the same to them? They didn't know that Jiang Hai was actually a victim, but this didn't prevent them from imagining it. Thinking of this, the girls' faces turned red, especially Little Ya. Since Delina and Marian were still in name, Jiang Hai might not make a move. However, Little Ya was Bernice's little sister, and they were living together. If that was the case, they would be dangerous, seeing the dumbfounded looks of the three girls. Azalina didn't say anything, because she had long regarded herself as Jiang Hai's woman. As long as he ordered her, she could climb onto his bed at any time. She didn't feel any psychological burden about the scene just now. Most importantly, she could tell that all the women in this room were really interested in Jiang Hai. Thinking about it, if he were to capture himself and the three girls, then the number of people around Jiang Hai would be increasing. Chapter 650. Christmas had arrived once again amidst thousands of cheers. This was Jiang Hai's second Christmas in Winthrop. Compared to the first Christmas, this one was much more fun. At least, there were more people. Not only were there more people around him, but there were also more people in the manor. December 24th was Christmas Eve. According to the annual customs, this was also a holiday for all the major regions of the United States. Just like the Spring Festival in China, Christmas was also a holiday, and Christmas and the Spring Festival were connected. Therefore, during this period of time, the children would take at least half a month off, and some working adults would take about a week off. On the 23rd, a lot of people came to Jiang Hai's manor, including Philip Turner's two sons who had come last year. Last year, there were two couples, but this year, there was only one. The elder son still came with his wife, but the younger son had already broken up with his wife. Penelope also came, but she only came on the 23rd to take a look at Berkdaler and then left. Unlike Philip's two sons, they would stay here until the new year. On the 23rd, Jiang Hai held a party in his villa in the evening. It was not quite right to call a party. It was more like an annual meeting. While summarizing this year, he also looked forward to next year. Of course, he would give year-end bonuses. In Jiang Hai's manor, although the fish hadn't been put on the market in large quantities this year, with the promotion of the tourists, he had made a lot of money from the lobsters. In 3 months, not counting the town's income, Jiang Hai had earned a total of $35 million from selling lobsters. Of course, in addition to lobsters, abalones, sea cucumbers, and the like were also included. Jiang Hai kept $1 million of the $35 million and gave the rest to the fishermen as a reward. Jiang Hai had a total of 5 sailors: Edward Anderson, Tommy Charles, Eleanor Cece, Andrew Christian, and Marlon Rupert. Each of these 5 men received $70,000. Of course, this money had to be paid in taxes, so it was up to them to decide what to do with it. When 7 checks were sent to the 7 men in envelopes, they were so happy that their eyes almost couldn't be seen. This was real money in addition to their salaries. They had barely done anything this year, and they had already earned almost $200,000. This kind of income was unimaginable in the past. The fishermen who had their own boats might not even have such a high income in a year, not to mention that they had to repair their boats, hire sailors, and pay higher taxes. Unlike the fishermen, who made a pure profit. Therefore, they were looking forward to how high their income would be when they could start fishing in March next year. In addition to the sailors, Jiang Hai's ranch was the most profitable. Naturally, the cowboys were also the most important. Jiang Hai's year-end bonus was calculated based on the total income. The fisherman only made a little more than $1 million, and he received a round number. But the number on the ranch was a little bit higher. Last year, Jiang Hai sold a total of 12,459 cows, which was recorded in detail. The average price of each cow was $142,550, and the total income was $1,776,30 for $50. A lot of taxes had to be paid. The federal tax was 38.6%. In the eyes of his countrymen, George Bush was a jerk, but he was very popular in the United States. It was because after he took office, he gave the Americans a 0.5% tax cut. In the United States, taxes were divided into 5 categories, and the lowest category didn't have to be paid. After George W. Bush took office in 2002, different people paid different tax rates. Apart from those who didn't pay, some paid 27%, some paid 30%, and those whose annual income was more than $50,000 and less than $130,000 had to pay 35%. Jiang Hai's income was definitely more than $130,000, so he had to pay the highest tax rate of 38.6%. In addition to the 38.6% federal tax, he also had to pay a 2% Social Security tax. Whether or not he would enjoy Social Security in the United States in the future, he had to pay this money. There was also property tax, housing tax, and car use tax. Of course, these were all small sums. Like last year, the property tax was about $6 million, and the car use tax was a few $100,000. The state tax in Massachusetts was 5%. He didn't have to pay the local tax, because there was no local tax. That was to say, in April next year, Jiang Hai would have to pay 45.6% tax on his annual income. According to the figures reported by Moses Adams, the tax rate was about $809.87 million. Including the housing tax, it added up to about $815 million. But he didn't have to pay all of this money. Because the Federation encourages the farming of agricultural products, his tax rate was reduced by 3.5%. In addition, there was a 1.2% subsidy from the local government's manor, a 1.5% subsidy from the local government's fishery, a 2% subsidy from the federal government, a 2% subsidy from the federal government, a subsidy for farming, and so on. These things reduced Jiang Hai's tax rate by 8.5%. In other words, Jiang Hai only needed to pay a tax rate of 37.1%, which was more than $658 million. Including the housing and car, it was about $600 million, less than $70 million. Although it was still a lot, it wasn't bad. More than half of this money had to be handed over to the federal government, and about 30% had to be sent back to the local government. The state of Massachusetts accounted for about 20%, Boston for 5%, and Winthrop for 5%. According to Mayor Wallace, Winthrop would probably receive more than $30 million from Jiang Hai's taxes. It wasn't a problem at all to say that Jiang Hai had supported Winthrop. $30 million in tax revenue next year was a great thing. No wonder Mayor Wallace thought so highly of Jiang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai couldn't give the cowboys a bonus based on the percentage of the fishermen's taxes. But it couldn't be a small amount. Jiang Hai had a total of 5 cowboys: Robbins Garcia, Burt Dollar, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fells, and Bell Lester. These 5 had earned more than $300,000 this year. Today, Jiang Hai gave each of them another $200,000. They had never even heard of an annual income of $500,000, let alone thought about it. Robbins Garcia and the others were very happy. Bell and Harriman were going crazy, especially Bell. When he retired from Triangle State and became a cowboy, he was laughed at by many people. Although they didn't dare to laugh at him in front of his face, his reputation in the town wasn't very good. It wasn't until he met Jiang Hai that he knew what a real cowboy was. Seeing their father accept the check for $200,000, Philemon Turner's 2 sons couldn't help but feel jealous. But unfortunately, there were no other positions in the manor for them to join, and they regretted it. Why didn't they hug Jiang Hai's thigh last year? It was really a failure. In addition to the cowboys and fishermen, Jiang Hai also gave a lot of benefits to the others. For example, although Dulles Gerard and O'Connor Murphy hadn't produced any wine yet, they also worked hard this year. After the wine was produced, they would naturally get a reward. But this year, Jiang Hai also prepared a red envelope for them, a check of $50,000. Although it wasn't much, the 2 of them were very grateful. Aphrodite and the others naturally wouldn't be less. Each of them received $100,000. This made these girls gather together and start to discuss what to buy. Women all like to be beautiful, especially when there was someone who liked them. Since that night, something that shouldn't have happened between Jiang Hai and Bernice. Although Jiang Hai was driven out of the room by Bernice in the middle of the night and rushed back to his room to sleep, as she said, she no longer cared about the matters between Jiang Hai and Aphrodite and the others. Aphrodite and the others could freely enter and leave Jiang Hai's villa and could also stay here at night. But every night, before Jiang Hai returned to his room, Bernice would ask him to go to her room and have a good talk. Aphrodite and the others didn't say anything about this because they didn't care about it. As for the two little rich women, Lilia and Bernice, Jiang Hai didn't leave them behind. Their money was theirs, and Jiang Hai gave Jiang Hai. Lilia was Jiang Hai's head chef, and she had been cooking for so long. Even if she didn't take credit, she still worked hard. Bernice is Jiang Hai's doctor here. Usually, if there's any headache or fever, they would come to her for treatment. So, Jiang Hai gave each of them a check. After all, the relationship between the three of them was a little ahem. So, Jiang Hai gave each of them $1 million. Bernice and Lilia didn't stand on ceremony. Since Jiang Hai gave it to them, they accepted it. Azalina and Knursen Peters were Jiang Hai's bodyguards, so they naturally wouldn't be left behind. Azalina received $1 million in addition to her salary as a year-end bonus, and Conrad also received $1 million. But Conrad was a little confused after receiving the money, because he didn't know what to do with it. In the past, his money was controlled by his managers, who were his buddies. He was only responsible for boxing. He came here to find Jiang Hai to repay his kindness. Now that Jiang Hai gave him money, he really didn't know what to do with it. Usually, Jiang Hai would prepare food and clothes for him, and Jiang Hai would also prepare everything for him, whether it was for sports or when he went out. All the daily necessities were very complete. So, even if he had money, he didn't know what to do with it. The only ones in the villa who didn't receive any money were Delina and Marion. Although they were already 15 years old. Oh, they would be 16 years old in a few days. They didn't help Zhang Tai at all. Of course, even if they didn't have money, they had a lot of gifts. After happily splitting the money, the festive atmosphere in Jiang Hai's group became even more intense. They had a good gathering on the 23rd. On the 24th, early in the morning, Jiang Hai and the others went to the forest and cut down a few small trees to make Christmas trees. After going back, they decorated the trees. With the help of natural energy, the trees in the forest grew very fast. The faster they grew, the faster they produced seeds. And the faster they produced seeds, the faster the forest covered. Jiang Hai also deliberately went to the forest when he was cutting down trees, but he only saw the mountain lion's family. Jiang Hai didn't see the water gloom or the crocodile. They might be hibernating. Jiang Hai was very clear that snakes hibernated, but did crocodiles hibernate as well? Well, let's just say that it hibernated as well. Anyway, he didn't see it. Although it was winter, the mountain lion's family had a good time. There were countless turkeys, pheasants, and hares in the forest. They were the only large predators, so they had plenty of food to eat. There was no need to worry about that. After spending the whole day decorating the Christmas tree, the 24th Christmas Eve arrived. Jiang Hai didn't say much about the origin of the 3 days of Christmas. After all, he already explained last year that Jiang Hai wasn't a religious person. In fact, no one in his villa was a religious person. Therefore, on Christmas Eve, didn't go to Mass or anything like that. They just ate and drank together, and Christmas Eve passed. That night, Aphrodite and the others also stayed in Jiang Hai's villa. 8 people squeezed into the villa at once. The total number of people was in the blink of an eye. The next day was Christmas. When Jiang Hai walked under the Christmas tree in the morning, he found that it was full of gifts. This was also a Christmas custom for Europeans and Americans. They would give each other gifts. Jiang Hai naturally gave everyone a gift, and he also received a gift from everyone in his room. Delina gave him a pair of gloves, which she made herself. Although it was a bit rough, it was a kind gesture. Marion gave him a scarf, and Bernice gave him a leather hat. It was like the leather hat of Baldy Valiant in the domestic animation. It was very popular in the Northeast many years ago. Well, the specific time was probably during the period when the Heavenly King ruled over the Earth Tiger. Basically, everyone gave these small things because, to be honest, no one was sure of money. It was unnecessary to give some precious things. Among the gifts, the most valuable one was Azalina's gift. She gave Jiang Hai an August magazine. However, it wasn't the 5-round magazine that Jiang Hai bought, but a 30-round magazine. One must know that it was impossible to buy a 30-round magazine in the U.S. In the black market, a 30-round magazine was much more expensive than a gun. Jiang Hai had a lot of money, but he didn't buy it. Regarding this gift, Jiang Hai was quite fond of it. He immediately went upstairs to grab a gun and went outside to shoot a bullet. Then everyone started to get busy, preparing for tonight's Christmas dinner. It was very important, just like the reunion dinner during Chinese New Year. Naturally, Jiang Hai's head chef, Xiaoya, became today's head chef. Regarding this point, no one felt that there was anything wrong with it. However, while she was cooking, Xiaoya kept glancing at Jiang Hai. Chapter 651. After Christmas, there was only the last day of the Christmas holiday left. It was December 26th, the Catholic Carnival. On this day, people who had been cooped up at home for the past 2 days would go out to the streets to get some fresh air. However, the town was quite lively that day because the banquet was about to begin. The auditorium for the banquet was in the town school. In America, every school had an auditorium. Every year, during enrollment and graduation, there would be an assembly there. Winthrop was the same. Winthrop used to be a very big town. After all, when the fishing industry was flourishing and the West was still the wilderness, the East area near Boston was where the rich lived. According to Mayor Wallace, when he was young, Winthrop's population was close to 10,000. At that time, Winthrop's fishing boats were all over the river. Of course, there were also a lot of codfish. People could even walk to Europe on the backs of codfish. Of course, this was all nonsense. People who believed it were crazy. However, it was undeniable that when the fishing industry was not so liberalized, there were indeed many people in Winthrop. In fact, this was also related to the American national policy. Around 1960, the United States entered a period of rapid development. The new generation of young people grew up after World War II. After World War II, the United States was already the world's largest country. This allowed the Americans, who had been suppressed by the Europeans, to be extremely indulgent and liberated. The new generation of young people grew up. They did not have international pressure, so it created a crazy social situation in the United States from the early 1990s. During that time, the United States industry was developing rapidly, and people's moral bottom line was constantly being refreshed. According to statistics, the young people in the United States during that time were quite chaotic. It was even more chaotic than in China now. Drugs and things between men and women were quite common in the United States. According to current scholars, that was the time when the Americans liberated themselves. It was also the time when the incidence of AIDS in the United States was the highest. People who paid attention to the NBA would know that the private life of the NBA players at that time was also very chaotic. First, there was Zhang Wanqian, who claimed to be able to kill 20,000 people. Later, there was the magician Elvin Johnson, who was unfortunately chosen. Because people were in chaos, there was a large number of newborns. Around 1980, these newborns grew up, and they also needed to work. At that time, the Western United States was not as developed as it is now, so a large number of labor forces poured into the Eastern United States. Although Winthrop wasn't a big place back then, it was still much better than the cities in the West. Therefore, a large amount of labor force poured in. However, with the development of the West, the amount of fish in the Atlantic Ocean decreased, and the pollution became more and more serious. Since entering the new century, Winthrop had become a lot more deserted. After entering 2005, the town became a bit gloomy. Originally, the town had a population of tens of thousands, but after entering the year 2000, there were less than 3,000 people left. After 2005, there were less than 2,000 people left. Now, there were only slightly more than 1,000 people left. However, With the development of the town's tourism industry, the population would gradually return. After all, people relied on money to survive. Wherever there was money to be made, they would go there. This was inevitable. After saying so much, there was actually one point. The location of the banquet was the auditorium of the small school. The auditorium was built in 1987, when Winthrop was still a big place. Therefore, it was not a problem to accommodate thousands of people. The auditorium was divided into two parts. The first part was the main venue, where the performances were. The second part was a buffet area, where the gathering would be held later. In the morning, Jiang Hai and the others had already gone to the venue to prepare for their own performances. Jiang Hai's and Bernice's programs were actually small programs. Jiang Hai's program might be more important. As for Delina's program, it was a big show. It was arranged to be last. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the program officially began. Following the announcer's announcement, the performances started one by one. Jiang Hai's performance was quite advanced. It was the third performance. This was also because he didn't want to delay his performance. Hence, after he went up, he did a round of boxing. His boxing was vigorous and vigorous. The audience below also cheered thunderously. Although they couldn't understand it, no matter where they were, they would feel that it was awesome even though they didn't understand it. Jiang Hai was having fun, and he even deliberately performed a wall walk. Of course, it was not like in the movies. He was just physically superior. He did not really have any internal energy. Therefore, he just walked along the prepared plank for a while, and then flipped over a 7-meter-high plank. In fact, if Bale was prepared, he might be able to do it. But in the eyes of the audience, it was quite magical. When Jiang Hai went down, it was not an exaggeration to say that it was thunderous cheers. Jiang Hai also happily bowed to the audience to express his gratitude. Then he went down to his seat in the first row, sitting between Mayor Wallace and Murray Smith, and watched the performance. Of course, the three of them were not only talking about the performance, but also about the new wave of Winthrop strategies after spring. The success of the season last autumn made the two old men very optimistic about the future of Winthrop. In their view, the town would make more money next year. In addition, in April, Jiang Hai would pay tens of millions in taxes to the town, and the town's finances would be greatly relieved. At that time, they would be more confident. With money in their pockets, naturally, they would not panic. This was inevitable. After they talked for a while, it was time for Bernice's solo. Bernice had been choosing for many days, and the song she finally chose was also a very popular song this year. This was the theme song of a movie, Fast and Furious 7. It was created to commemorate the second male lead of the Fast and Furious series, Paul Walker, although singing this song at a carnival was somewhat inappropriate. However, the atmosphere was still very good. After singing this song, Bernice went to the stands and sat behind Jiang Hai. She naturally put her hand on Jiang Hai's shoulder. Since that night, although the relationship between Bernice and Jiang Hai remained the same on the surface, and Bernice did not even think of herself as Jiang Hai's girlfriend, the two of them were becoming more and more intimate. Regarding Bernice's change, the people in the villa more or less had some reaction, but the people outside did not seem to have any reaction. After all, in the eyes of outsiders like Mayor Wallace and the others, in their eyes, Bernice and the others were probably Jiang Hai's women. Otherwise, why would Jiang Hai support them like this? In America, there was no such thing as support. Men and women were equal in some things. Men earn money, and women also earn money. It did not mean that after becoming a couple, the man had the obligation to spend money to support the woman. This did not make sense in America. Being a housewife was actually also a profession. They would work and work at home in exchange for living at home. It was not like the idea in China. When they were boyfriend and girlfriend, it was even more so. Therefore, in their eyes, since Bernice and the others were living in Jiang Hai's house, they were probably already Jiang Hai's people. Therefore, when they showed a little more intimacy, they felt that it was normal. There was no different feeling. As they talked and chatted, unknowingly, it was already the last program, Frozen. Although Jiang Hai had seen the movie version of this cartoon, watching Shinny Clive and the others acting was quite interesting. Especially when Xiaoya came out, it was really breathtaking. The people below couldn't help but let out a wow sound. The most important thing was that Xiaoya's voice was very good. When she sang Riley Dog, many people in the audience sang along. With the final ending, the audience was also thunderous cheers. Then, the main cast went on stage and bowed. Mayor Wallace also announced that today's banquet had officially begun. With everyone's cheers, everyone walked into the auditorium and began to enjoy their banquet. However, halfway through the meal, a snowstorm suddenly blew up outside. It was a good thing to snow on Christmas Day. Seeing this scene, some people who lived far away prepared to go back first. If the snowstorm got bigger, it would be troublesome. However, Jiang Hai did not care. Today, most of the people in his manor came, so he drove a lot of cars. Jiang Hai's shield and his 3 pickup trucks. With these 4 cars, even if they used knives, they could still go home. Therefore, they didn't mind and continued to eat, laugh, and chat. But at this moment, a police siren suddenly came from outside. Then a police car suddenly drove over from a distance and stopped at the entrance of the auditorium. Then a young police officer ran in from the outside in a sorry state. As soon as he came in, he attracted the attention of many people. As the chief of the police station, Maris Smith naturally reacted and immediately walked in front of him. "What's the matter?" Looking at the person who rushed in, Maris Smith asked anxiously. "Huff, huff, there is news from Boston, saying that the deer in the Alabama mountains have rioted. They are now going down the mountain, and one of them is moving in the direction of Winthrop." Looking at Maris Smith, the young police officer took 2 deep breaths and said anxiously, "What deer rioting?" Hearing this news, Maris Smith's face could not help but have a thin layer of sweat. "This is too unlucky. How can the deer rioting? I remember that there hasn't been a riot for more than 10 years. Hearing the sound here, Mayor Wallace also came over anxiously and said nervously, "It seems that in their view, the deer rioting is a big deal. In recent years, the local government has been paying attention to environmental protection. The vegetation in the Alabama mountains should be intact. The deer shouldn't be rioting." Morris Smith said hesitantly after hesitating for a moment, "I heard it's the Canadians. One of their villages was destroyed by deer herds, so they formed a team to hunt deer in the mountains. They chased the deer herds from the Canadian side of the Alabama mountains to the United States. The ecological environment here can't support so many deer. In addition, the snow this year is especially heavy and the mountains are sealed. The deer herds have nothing to eat, so they can only come down the mountain." Hearing what Mayor Wallace said, the young police officer couldn't help but say helplessly. Hearing his words, many people in the room expressed their anger. Those Canadian country bumpkins. Even Maris Smith couldn't help but curse after hearing the news. Although Canada is the little brother of the United States and Canada is the backyard of the United States, in fact, Americans and Canadians are basically in a state of mutual dislike. Canadians don't like Americans, and Americans don't like Canadians. Most of the Canadians are descendants of the British and French. They are different from the prisoners on the June flower ship that came to North America. Most of the people on their side were later immigrants from the British government when they colonized the United States. There are also some defeated soldiers and their families. In their eyes, the adventurous spirit of the Americans is rude, brainless, and unwise. In the eyes of the Americans, most of the adults are pretending to be noble and polite, but in fact, they're a group of cowards. Of course, this is a bit too one-sided, but this is like the legendary regional dog. The 2 countries were the same pants on the official side, but among the people, they don't get along well with each other. Of course, it is fine in the big cities, but in smaller places, there will be some friction. Obviously, Winthrop is not a big place. "Wallace, it looks like we can only end tonight's banquet here." Turning his head, Murray Smith shrugged at Mayor Wallace Covey, indicating that the banquet had to end early. Although he was somewhat unwilling, he still arranged for it to be first. "I know, the deers coming down the mountain is not a joke. Everyone, we may have to stop here tonight. Now let's pack up and go home. Unless it's a last resort, don't go out for the time being." Hearing Maris Smith's words, Mayor Wallace also raised his hands and said loudly to the people around him. Hearing Maris Smith's words, Most people nodded and then began to walk out, but there are some young people who are a little confused, such as Jiang Hai. Chapter 652. Isn't it just deer? Why are you so cautious? When everyone was ready to leave, Jiang Hai walked over and looked at Mayor Wallace with some confusion. Deer? He had hunted deer in the mountains before. Deer were very timid, but they were very curious. That was a roe deer, but a roe deer was also a type of deer. So in Jiang Hai's view, it was just deer going down the mountain. Was there a need to make such a big fuss? Not letting people out on the street? Was this thing dangerous? He had never heard of deer eating people. Anyway, no matter what other people thought, Jiang Hai felt that they were making a big fuss out of nothing. Hey, Jiang, you haven't experienced a deer riot. It's very scary. Hundreds of thousands of deer, with their heads down, no matter what is in front of them, they will crash into it. People, cars, even armored vehicles will be overturned. It's extremely dangerous. When he heard Jiang Hai's words, Mayor Wallace sighed. Jiang Hai was still young. Sometimes his thinking was too simple. When he heard what Mayor Wallace said, Jiang Hai imagined it. If that was the case, it would be quite scary. Yeah, I remember when I was young, there were often deer disasters in the town. That was because we destroyed the vegetation in the Alabama mountains at that time. The deer had nothing to eat, so they would come down the mountain to look for food. But at that time, our solution was very simple. We used machine guns to shoot all the deer, and that was it. Touching his chin, Murray Smith heard his words and could not help but sigh. Then we have to shoot them now. Hearing that there was a solution, why not do it? Jiang Hai did not understand. That was when I was young, that is, 50 years ago. Since 20 or 30 years ago, the Federation banned the random hunting of wild animals, and no one dared to do so. If you dare to do so, the Nature Animal Protection Agency will not mind taking you to court. Moreover, this kind of thing will be confirmed. Whoever fired the gun will go to jail. At the same time, it will also have a huge international impact. Think about Japan's whale hunting and their dolphin slaughter. The international impact is huge. If it were not for the United States standing firmly behind them, they would probably become the world's common enemy again. Looking at the doubt on Jiang Hai's face, Mayor Wallace sighed. Although a herd of deer is not a whale or a dolphin, if someone were to expose this matter, he would lose his position as mayor, and Murray Smith would also lose his job. Not to mention tourism, the town would probably not have any tourists in the future, and the most important thing was that whoever shot the gun would probably stay in prison for the rest of his life. The UA did not have life imprisonment, and there was no prison limit. Hunting deer would not be sentenced to death. But illegally killing a deer with a hunting license, you can kill a few, but you need to register, would be sentenced to 3 years in prison. Killing 10 would be 30 years. Just now, Murray Smith said that there were hundreds and thousands of them, which meant that he might be sentenced to thousands of years in prison. Even if it was someone like Jiang Hai, if he went in, he would probably spend all his money and he would not be able to come out in a few years. 20 or 30 years in prison would be considered a mercy. Hearing Mayor Wallace's words, Jiang Hai could not help but sigh. How cruel! It seemed that in the UA, the rich were not so free. But fortunately, he did not have any thoughts about these wild animals. Ever since the Federation banned deer hunting, we can only use shotguns to attack every time there's a stampede. The defense is indeed not as good as before, and many people are injured or even killed every time. I don't know if it will be the same this time, but there's one good thing. The government will pay for all the damage caused by the deer. All right, Jiang, you should go back first. Although we can only use shotguns to protect you, there are no restrictions on you and your manor. Be careful at night, and if there's a herd of deer appearing, just shoot them to death. Looking at Jiang Hai, Murray Smith said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also expressed that he understood. After exchanging a few more words with Mayor Wallace and Murray Smith, the two of them also went to work. As for Jiang Hai, he found some people who were still in a daze. After explaining the situation to them, they were ready to leave. Today, almost everyone in Jiang Hai's manor was here. Only Burke Dollar, Knerson Peters, Dulles Gerard, and O'Connor Murphy stayed in the manor. After receiving the money on the 23rd, they left on the 24th to go back to Europe for Christmas. Jianghai put them on the 15th of January next year, which was also a long holiday. Except for the four of them, everyone else came. Because the two of them were both single, and one of them didn't like to join in the fun, and the other only liked to practice martial arts and didn't want to watch shows, it was best to let them stay here. Other than that, everyone else came. Jianghai, Daliana, Marian, Bernice, Littleya, Azalina, Aphrodite, Dinah, Hilda, Becky, Sheila, Ohilia, Bridget, and Janice made up of 14 people. In addition to Robbins Garcia, Philemon Turner's family of 5, Harriman Fells, Belle Lester, and Edward Anderson was 1, Tommy Charles was 2, Eleanor Cece was 3, Andrew Christie was 2, and Marlon Rupert was 1. In total, there were 17 people. If they wanted to leave, it would be a little troublesome. Fortunately, Jianghai drove a lot of cars. 2 F-750S, 1 F-650, and 1 Braille Aegis. Although these cars had a standard seating capacity of 5 people, they could seat more than 5 people. In the absence of traffic police, the F-750 had 1 driver's seat, 1 co-driver's seat, and at least 5 people in the back. If they were thin women, it wouldn't be a problem to seat 6 people. After all, the car was wide enough, and with the bucket at the back, they could seat as many people as they wanted. In Winthrop, traffic police wouldn't check Jianghai because of this. In order to take care of Jianghai's girls, Aphrodite, Dana, Hilda, Paige, Sheila, Ashiria, Bridget, and Janice sat in the back of an F-750. One of them sat in the front passenger seat, while the other sat in the F-750. Belle Lester, Harriman Fells, Robbins Garcia, and Edward Anderson, who weren't afraid of the cold, sat in the bucket at the back. In short, the 3 cars were full. Jianghai, Littleya, Bernice, Daliana, Marian, and Azalina were preparing to leave in Jianghai's Aegis. After everyone got in the car, they rushed to Jianghai's manor. However, when they were about to reach the manor, Bernice suddenly shouted from the car, "Where's Littleya?" Hearing Bernice's shout, Jianghai also suddenly found that there should be 4 people sitting in the back, but there were only 3 at this time. He immediately used the walkie-talkie in the car to ask the 3 cars in front to see if they had found Littleya. As a result, Littleya was indeed not there, and there was no one in the 3 cars in front. This shocked Jianghai, and Bernice wanted to go back directly to find Littleya. Call her immediately and see where she is. Fortunately, Jianghai was not completely numb and immediately said to Bernice. Hearing Jianghai's words, Bernice also immediately called Littleya. Fortunately, Littleya picked up, which made everyone feel relieved. However, Littleya was still in the town's auditorium at this time. It turned out that when she was performing, she accidentally scratched her clothes at the back of her waist. Because of her personality, after the performance, she did not directly change and go to the auditorium to eat. Instead, she went backstage and found Shinny Clive. After getting some needle and thread, she was mending her clothes there, but her mending speed was really not fast. She didn't hear the commotion outside. Indeed, the banquet was chaotic as well. Are we going back to pick up Littleya? Hearing that Xiaoya was still there, Penny let out a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she was a little worried. It's fine as long as you know where she is. We will be at the manor soon. After I send you back to the manor, I will pick her up again. Knowing that she was fine, Jianghai also breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at the distance, it was less than 5 minutes away from the manor. Instead of going back now, it was better to send the girls to the place first and then go there with Jianghai. For Jianghai's decision, Bernice did not object, because she knew that Jianghai was right. It was really too troublesome to go back now. If it was just Jianghai, the speed might be faster. The 5-minute drive was still very fast. Not long after, Jianghai parked the car outside his manor and did not go in. After all, Bernice and the others were still very anxious. After leaving them at the manor's door and letting them go in by themselves, Jianghai hurriedly turned the car around and ran back. Indeed, as Bernice said, when there were 5 of them in the car, Jianghai did not dare to run too fast. After all, if there was an accident, it would be troublesome. When there was only himself, Jianghai's speed was obviously increased to a limit, because his reaction speed was 4 times the limit of a human. Jiang Hai returned to the auditorium in less than 20 minutes without slowing down during the half-hour drive. At this time, the auditorium had long been empty, leaving only Little Yi sitting there in a daze. Phew, I finally found you. Looking at Little Yi sitting there quietly, Jiang Hai let out a sigh of relief. I really troubled you. Seeing Jiang Hai coming, Little Yi couldn't help but stand up and say apologetically, "What trouble are you talking to me about? Really, let's go." Wait a minute, didn't you eat just now? Hearing Little Yi's words, Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at her and was about to pull her away. But just as he was about to leave, he found that the food in front of Little Yi was still neat and tidy. It seemed that this girl did not eat when she was waiting for him to come over. "No, I have been thinking about things, so I didn't have time to eat." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Little Yi stuck out her tongue and said quietly, "Really?" Hearing Little Yi's words, Jiang Hai saw her backpack. This backpack was filled with costume. If it were not for this thing, she would not have been left here. He opened the backpack and put some cold food in it, mainly meat and the like. Of course, they were all wrapped in plastic bags. Then he pulled her away, got in the car, and threw the backpack in a back seat. Jiang Hai started the engine and headed in the direction of the manor. But as soon as the car started, the originally not small snowstorm seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Every household in the small town had turned off their lights. Even the police station was not prepared to make a move tonight. Because of such a big snowstorm, people would not be able to stand it in the snow. As for the deer, they would think about it tomorrow. *CK. Is there a mistake? So unlucky? After changing the low beam to high beam, Jiang Hai also saw what the creatures in the distance were. He slowly stepped on the brakes and stopped the car, but Jiang Hai's forehead was already sweating because these creatures were none other than the creatures he heard from Mayor Wallace and Director Morris just now, deer. When Jiang Hai discovered the deer also discovered them. Although Jiang Hai only glanced at them, he was able to roughly see the number of deer. There were at least a few dozen, maybe even 100. Most of them were female deer, but the leaders were male deer. In the middle of the herd, there were also some fawns. Most importantly, there were all kinds of deer. White-tailed deer, reindeer, camel deer. Deer did not have night vision. Now that they were in a circle, this might mean that they were preparing to sleep. However, Jiang Hai's headlights flashed. Not only did he see them clearly, but he also gave them a fright. The originally rampaging deer were abnormally irritable. Now that they saw Jiang Hai, they became even more irritable. In this herd of deer, many adult deer took the initiative to walk over and lower their heads on the road in the distance. This was the posture when the deer were preparing to charge. Seeing this, Jiang Hai could not help but nervously swallow a mouthful of saliva. He remembered what Mayor Wallace and Sheriff Morris had said. These rampaging deer could even overturn armored vehicles, let alone ordinary vehicles and people. What's more, his was just a civilian armored vehicle. The situation was really hard to predict. What do we do now? Looking at the nervous Jiang Hai, Xiaoyu could not help but hold Jiang Hai's hand and ask carefully. Chapter 653. Phew, hold on tight. Feeling Little Yi's nervousness, Jiang Hai grabbed her hand and placed it on the handle on her upper right. He knew that it was too late to return to the town now. In such a snowy day, and the snow was getting heavier and heavier, his car might not be as fast as these deer. Instead of luring these deer into the town, it was better to fight. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win. At least, Jiang Hai thought so. Looking at the deer in front of him, Jiang Hai turned on the headlights again. He wanted to force his way through. Moo! Although it was a deer and not a cow, it was indeed the sound of a deer's moo. Following the moo of the largest buck, the herd of deer that had already set up a formation quickly rushed toward Jiang Hai. Looking at the herd of deer rushing over, Jiang Hai also stepped on the accelerator. A car with about 30 bucks was approaching quickly. When the deer speed reached its limit, Jiang Hai's speed also reached about 100 kilometers. Bang, bang. At the moment of contact, there was a loud noise. The first deer hit the front of Jiang Hai's car. The hard antlers instantly broke Jiang Hai's headlights, but the impact of the car also broke its antlers instantly. The entire deer's body was lifted up by the car and slammed heavily into Jiang Hai's windshield. Then Jiang Hai found that the windshield in front of him was already full of cracks, but Jiang Hai didn't stop. Instead, he sped up, but these deer were now crazy. They didn't care whether Jiang Hai would stop the car or not. The only thing they wanted to do was to rush forward, rush forward. All the deer had bloodshot eyes, not to mention a car in front of them now. Even if it was a Tyrannosaurus, they would still rush over. Clang, 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 clang. One after another, the sounds of impact, as well as the pitiful cries of the deer in the distance, entered Jiang Hai's ears. However, he didn't have any fluctuations in his heart because he knew that if he didn't fight back, then he would die. In his Virgin Mary mode, he only had some influence on his morals. When it came to his own life, he wouldn't have any thoughts about the deer now. He didn't have a machine gun now. If he did, he wouldn't mind getting rid of all these deer. The impact and quality of the shield was indeed incomparable to that of natural creatures. Even if Jiang Hai was facing a polar bear, he could still easily send it flying, let alone these deer. So it didn't take long, maybe 10 or 20 seconds. Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then, after a short while, maybe 10 or 20 seconds, Jiang Hai felt that his car had hit at least 10 deer. After that, he found that the deer that hit his car had disappeared. The window in front of him was completely shattered. The deer's blood was plastered on the car, making Jiang Hai completely unable to see the situation in front of him. But at this time, he could only run until the end of the road, but his heart was more or less clear. After hitting the male deer, it should be the female deer and the young deer. As long as he hit these deer, he would have a chance to return to the manor. But at this time, Jiang Hai suddenly saw a figure appear on the side of his car. Seeing the figure getting closer and closer to Xiaoya in the car, Jiang Hai also panicked. It seemed that at this time, he also forgot that his car was bulletproof. "Be careful!" With a shout, he only had time to stretch out a hand to protect Xiaoya's head. Then, he felt a huge force coming. Then, the car that was still running on the road was hit by the deer and flew out. Of course, this was also related to the slippery snow on the ground. But in any case, the car was indeed pushed out. And most importantly, Jiang Hai still couldn't see the situation in front of him. He couldn't let go of the accelerator because if he did, he would be attacked by the deer. He didn't know how long his car could be pushed out. Now, he needed to rush out of the encirclement of the deer, but suddenly, he felt a sense of weightlessness. At this time, Jiang Hai wanted to control the direction, but it was too late. After the car rushed out for about 10 seconds, Jiang Hai saw a black shadow flash in front of him. The next second, there was a super loud sound. Bang! Jiang Hai's mind only flashed one thing. Maybe it hit a tree. Then the airbag in front of him instantly popped out. The hot air with the soft cloth slammed heavily on his face. Not only did it burn his face, but it also stunned him. In an instant, Jiang Hai's ears buzzed. In addition, his head was also stunned. His whole person seemed to have fainted in an instant. About a minute later, it could also be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour. Jiang Hai already had no concept of time. Who the F asterisk CK? Holding his forehead that was still a little painful, Jiang Hai shook his head and forced himself to calm down. He glanced at Xiaoya next to him. Xiaoya was directly knocked out by the airbag, but although her face was a little red, her breathing was still stable. This made Jiang Hai breathe a sigh of relief, but she didn't show any signs of waking up. After taking a few deep breaths, Jiang Hai slowly calmed down and then began to check his current situation. Now, Jiang Hai's face was no longer hot, which meant that a period of time had indeed passed. Instead, it was a little cold. This was because in the corner of the front glass, there was a gap. He had to admit that this car was really sturdy. Even so, the glass didn't break even a small piece. Instead, it was the gaps on both sides of the glass that couldn't hold on. The cold wind kept pouring in, and it seemed that this collision also damaged Jiang Hai's car engine. In fact, it was indeed broken. Because of this collision, the antlers that were inserted into the partition just now were knocked straight into it. The antlers easily broke the metal outside the engine, and now the engine can no longer be started. Moreover, there was a burst of gasoline smell coming from the engine. I still have to come out first. After taking a deep breath, Jiang Hai whispered in a low voice. Although it was a collision, the probability of the car exploding was quite low. It was not like in the movies where as long as the car flipped and crashed, it would inevitably explode. However, nothing was certain. It was better to be careful. But if he wanted to leave, where to? This was a very troublesome problem. He glanced at the window on his side. Fortunately, the window on his side was not broken. He opened the window and looked outside. The wind and snow outside were getting heavier and heavier. Vaguely, there seemed to be a small house in the distance in the snow. This was also thanks to Jiang Hai's excellent eyesight. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to see it. He glanced at his phone. In such a big snowstorm, there was naturally no signal, but the map in his phone could still be used. Although there was no way to update and start the GPS, the original map was still there. After opening the map, he took a careful look. After finding his position, he glanced at the front. Indeed, there should be a small house there. It belonged to the Contlay family in Winthrop Town. This family sold fruits in the town. They had a piece of land dedicated to planting fruit trees. Now, his position should be in the orchard of his family. As for the small house, it was used by their family to look after the orchard. The relationship between Jiang Hai and their family was not bad. They had met a few times and talked a little. They were not very familiar with each other, but they were not particularly unfamiliar either. Let's go and see the situation first. After stretching his neck, Jiang Hai unfastened the seatbelt and climbed to Xiaoya's side. After unfastening her seatbelt, he called Xiaoya softly. He couldn't leave Xiaoya alone in the car. Now the car had turned off, and there was a snowstorm outside. If she fell asleep like this, she might really become a frozen beauty tomorrow. Little Ya. Under Jiang Hai's voice, Little Ya's brows slightly wrinkled. After about 10 seconds, she slowly opened her eyes. When she saw that it was Jiang Hai, she clearly breathed a sigh of relief. Then, she began to look around. Are we safe? Looking at the dark surroundings and the continuous wind blowing in, Xiaoya also felt a little numb. Not yet. We should be in the Contlay family's orchard now. Now, we will go to their house to rest. After looking around, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya nodded and was about to get up. However, she was stopped by Jiang Hai. He knew how hard he hit her just now. He had been resting for so long. Xiaoya also needed to rest. Don't move first. Wake up. I will get food and weapons. I will open the door for you later. Now, Jiang Hai was a little relieved. When he saw that Xiaoya did not eat, he deliberately took some food. Just like now, they were trapped outside. There was a considerable difference between having food and not having food. He picked up the food on his back and carried it on his back. Jiang Hai opened the door on his side and got out of the car. After looking around and confirming that there was indeed no danger nearby, he went to the back of the car. When he drove in China, there would be some things in the back of the car, let alone in the United States. Jiang Hai's current identity was also somewhat special, so a self-defense weapon was indispensable. Jiang Hai went to the back of the car and opened the back cover. He took out a box from under the back seat. Inside the box was his August, a handgun, and a satellite phone. They took this when they went into the mountains to burn guns. It was to prevent losing contact in such a situation. He first put the phone in his pocket, then took out the gun and tied it to his leg. Then he picked up the gun and checked it. There was no problem. The 30 bullets in the magazine were also full. After checking that there was nothing wrong, Jiang Hai closed the back door. Walking to Xiaoya's side of the car, Jiang Hai could not help but frown when he saw the situation here. The last ear should be an adult reindeer. This guy's strength was too great. Not only did it smash the car window, but because it was bulletproof, it did not explode. At the same time, it completely dented the car door. This damned fellow, I should have been the first one to bump into it. Recalling the existence of the Reindeer King, Jiang Hai also gritted his teeth with hatred. He forced the door open, and Xiaoya inside was also shocked. After discovering that it was Jiang Hai, she slowly walked down and pulled Jiang Hai's arm. Obviously, she was very scared now. Let's go. Feeling her appearance, Jiang Hai stroked her hair and whispered to her. Then, he pulled her towards a distance. "Umph." But just after a few steps, suddenly, there were some strange sounds mixed in the snow behind them. The situation is not right. Jiang Hai, who was originally on high alert, immediately narrowed his eyes after hearing this sound. He knew that the situation was not right. He immediately picked up his gun and looked behind him. He did not have night vision, and there were no stars or moon tonight. The blizzard was still blowing, but it did not prevent him from feeling these differences. Since he had the Dragon Balls, his perception of danger was obviously different from before. Now, he felt that the crisis was coming and felt that something was wrong. Jiang Hai picked up Xiaoya and let her grab his clothes, then slowly walked back. Jiang Hai held the gun, picked up his phone, turned on the flashlight function, and tied it to the gun. Although there was a flashlight, the visibility was not very high, but it was better than being blind. Jiang Hai looked around vigilantly, and along with the sound of humming, the sound of hooves moving forward in the snow also passed into Jiang Hai's ears. In Jiang Hai's eyes, for reindeer came up from the bottom of the distant hillside. Who the F*** CK? Looking at the 4 male reindeer in front of him, Jiang Hai secretly cursed. These guys are really haunting me. When Jiang Hai saw the reindeer also saw Jiang Hai. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Without saying anything, the reindeer on this side had already begun to charge. Papa, 2 consecutive sounds were heard. Jiang Hai's August fired 2 bullets. He had no choice. He was not an automatic rifle. He could not pull the trigger and fire the bullets. He could only pull it one by one. This was also the significance of American civilian firearms. Without automatic, there was no continuous fire. Without continuous fire, Jiang Hai could only pull it one by one. The 2 bullets rotated and drilled into the heads of the 2 reindeer. In an instant, the 2 reindeer were dead, but at this moment, the other 2 reindeer had already charged over. The sharp horns on the top of their heads had already lowered, and they directly stabbed at Jiang Hai's body. Chapter 654. Get down. Seeing that the other deer's horn was about to stab into his body, Jiang Hai shouted. Of course, this shout was for Little Ye, who was already dumbfounded behind him. The 2 of them almost rushed to the ground at the same time. The thick snow instantly covered the 2 of them, but it was precisely because of this that the other deer's horn did not hook Jiang Hai's intestines out. You be careful. Seeing the 2 deer quickly flying over his head, Jiang Hai shouted. Then he raised the gun in his hand and looked at the largest male deer. Without saying anything, he pulled the trigger directly. A crisp sound was heard. This male deer was not an ordinary existence. In such a critical moment, it actually forced itself to jump up. The attack that was originally aimed at its head only hit its butt. Then this guy moaned and quickly flashed into the nearby orchard. When Jiang Hai wanted to aim again, he could no longer find the other deer's figure. After all, the range of the mobile phone's flashlight was limited. But the other male deer was not so lucky. After hearing this sound, it wanted to escape, but Jiang Hai did not give a chance. He went up and shot directly at the male deer's neck. The huge impact sent the male deer flying. It fell into the snow and did not make a sound. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai could not help but let out a sigh of relief. He walked to Little Ye's side and pulled her up again. As a result, he found that Little Ye's body was covered in snow from head to toe. Let's go. After patting her, Jiang Hai took Little Ye and walked toward the blurry small house in the distance. In fact, they were not very far from the small house. But after all, it was now a snowstorm. When Jiang Hai and the others walked over, it took almost half an hour. It could be said that it was really not an easy thing. When they walked to the front of the house, Jiang Hai deliberately shouted a few times because in the United States, it was easy to cause a conflict by simply breaking into the other party's territory. After all, this was someone else's orchard. Jiang Hai did not know if there was anyone here. After confirming that there was no one, Jiang Hai walked into the small house. Because the door was locked from the inside, Jiang Hai had to shoot the door lock before opening the door and walking in. As soon as he walked in, Jiang Hai could not help but let out a sigh of relief. Finally, they were temporarily safe. With the light of the mobile phone, he glanced at the small house in front of him. This small house was indeed not big. about 10 square meters or so. There were only a few things inside, which could be seen at a glance. It was not a small bed, but at this time, there was no quilt or anything like that on the bed. It seemed that it was winter, and the Cantrell family was not going to stay here overnight. Opposite the bed, there was a fireplace. Other than that, there was nothing else, not even a table or chair. If one had to point out something, it would be the many pieces of wood that were pushed around the corner of the wall. It seems that we are going to spend the night here. Looking at the things in front of him, Jiang Hai said to Lilia helplessly. Yeah, Chu. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lilia also sighed and said helplessly. But just after she finished speaking, she sneezed. Hearing her voice, Jiang Hai turned to look at her and found that many places on Lilia's body were wet. Your clothes are wet. It is so cold now. If you wear wet clothes, you will get sick. I have to find a way to start the fire. Then, you should change into the dry clothes in the backpack first. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai said to Lilia, that one. Okay. Fortunately, she just went to mend her clothes, otherwise, there would be nothing dry now. Feeling in the dark, Lilia walked to the corner of the room. She blushed and began to change her clothes. Because the clothes were very tight, there was no way to wear other clothes inside. She could only wear a singlet and underpants. Now that she had to change, it was naturally the same. Fortunately, it was Jiang Hai in the room, otherwise she would be really embarrassed. However, at this time, Jiang Hai had no time to care about this because he was studying the problem of how to start the fire. Jiang Hai did not smoke, and this room was obviously cleaned up. It was a wooden house. If there were cigarettes or flints in it, it might burn one day. Therefore, the family did not leave any flints, magnesium sticks, or other things that could start fire. What should I do? Drill wood to start a fire? Scratching his head, Jiang Hai began to try to recall the problem of how to start a fire. It seems that in the early days, Belle taught me. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided to give it a try. He first squatted down and took off his shoes. Although the smell was not very good, he had to use his own shoelaces. Drilling wood to start a fire, to put it bluntly, was constant friction to generate heat, and then the ashes on the wood would emit too high a temperature, thus igniting a fire. Drilling wood to start a fire was the same as using shoelaces. Jiang Hai had only heard of it before, but he really did not try it. But now he had to give it a try. First, he untied his shoelaces, then found half of a relatively flat piece of wood. Then, he used a knife to carve a line here. Then, he used the toilet paper in his pocket as tinder, ready to try it. But unfortunately, it turned out that this was not a desirable method. Perhaps those experts could be promoted, but he could not. After working for half an hour, there was a burnt smell on the shoelaces, but not to mention a fire. Not even a spark could be seen. This is troublesome. Looking at the situation in front of him, Jiang Hai said with some helplessness, Jiang Hai, maybe I have a way to start a fire. Just as Jiang Hai was depressed here, Lilia, who had already changed her clothes and was sitting on the wooden bed, couldn't help but whisper. Hearing her voice, Jiang Hai looked at her strangely. There's gunpowder in the bullets in your gun, and there's gasoline in the car. You just need to use the gunpowder to ignite the gasoline outside. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he patted his head. He was really too stupid. There was gasoline and a pistol. What was there to worry about? You wait here for a while. I will be back soon. Patting Lilia's shoulder, Jiang Hai quickly ran out of the room and ran in the direction of his car. When he acted on his own, his speed was much faster. When he and Lilia ran over, it took almost half an hour, and it only took him less than 20 minutes to run back and forth. When he finished taking the gasoline, he also took back the signal flare. He poured the gasoline on the wood and threw it into the fireplace. Then he fired a signal flare at the wood. There was only a bang, and the entire fireplace was about to burn, but fortunately, it was still within a controllable range. Needless to say, it was clear that this was because Jiang Hai poured too much gasoline, but it really scared him and Lilia. Originally, he thought that if it really burst out, he and Lilia would immediately run out. The house burning was not a joke. But fortunately, the owner of this wooden house might have considered this, so the fireplace of this wooden house was still very good. Looking at the fire that was indeed in the fireplace, Jiang Hai went out to take a look. After seeing that the flue was indeed smoking, he couldn't help but walk in and let out a long breath. The fire was finally lit. After tightening the door with iron wire, Jiang Hai also took out his phone and called home. He told them that he and Lilia were fine, but they would probably have to wait until tomorrow to go back. After learning that the two of them were fine, Bernice and the others finally felt relieved. One must know that when Jiang Hai didn't come back, they were extremely anxious. Sure enough, as they thought, Jiang Hai really had an accident. But fortunately, the matter was not very serious. At least, Jiang Hai could still control it. You must be hungry. After I heat up these things, let's eat. After making the call and reporting that they were safe, Jiang Hai picked up the food in the backpack, but unfortunately, it didn't last for so long. The originally delicious food was as hard as iron at this time. With a helpless smile, Jiang Hai said to Lilia, who was sitting on the bed. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lilia couldn't help but raise her head and look at Jiang Hai. But Jiang Hai found that her condition was not very good. He walked over and touched her forehead. He found that Lilia's forehead was somewhat hot, but it was not particularly serious. It was understandable. After all, she was busy for a day and had not eaten. Later, she encountered this incident. First, she was frightened, then she fell into the snow. Then, because her clothes were wet and she changed into such thin clothes, she was frozen for almost an hour. Now, although the fire was rising, her body might not be able to hold on if it wasn't for Jiang Hai wasting a lot of spiritual energy a while ago, let alone just a low fever. Lilia, cheer up. Let's eat something and then go to sleep. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai stroked her hair and whispered. And, hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lilia was like a kitten. She didn't have anything to say. She just made a soft sound. Looking at her, Jiang Hai first took off his coat and spread it on the cold bed. Then, he let Lilia lie here first. Then, he took off his sweater and covered her body. He only wore a thin sweater and squatted in front of the fireplace to roast the meat. Fortunately, the meat was cooked quickly. After all, it was cooked before. He just needed to reheat it. After the meat was roasted, Jiang Hai used a knife to slice the meat and fed it to Lilia. After eating some things, Lilia felt a lot better. During the time when Jiang Hai was busy, Lilia's coat had also dried. He took it off and covered Lilia's body again. Xiaoya fell asleep very quickly with a warm bed and a full body. Coupled with the shock and exhaustion, Xiaoya quickly fell asleep. When she got up again, she looked at her phone. It was already past 3 o'clock in the morning. After sleeping by the fire, she felt much better. At least her head wasn't as hot as before. However, it was inevitable that she would be thirsty if she continued to roast like this. When she opened her eyes to look for water, she found Jiang Hai sitting by her bed and looking at the fire in front of him. From time to time, he would throw a piece of wood or stir the flames. Seeing this scene, Lilia couldn't help but feel warm in her heart. At the same time, she also felt extremely safe. En, you're up. Do you feel better? Looking at him, Lilia couldn't help but move her body gently, but this soft sound made Jiang Hai look over instantly. When he saw that Lilia had opened her eyes again, Jiang Hai immediately stood up and said with a smile, En, I feel much better, but do you have water? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lilia nodded, but after hesitating, she said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai immediately handed over the kettle next to him. He just wanted a car to get this kettle when Lilia was asleep. Usually, he really didn't notice that the things in his car were quite incomplete. Generally speaking, first aid kits, light sticks, and so on. These things that were used in the wild, Jiang Hai didn't have them. Jiang Hai had already decided that after this incident, when he went to repair the car, he would buy these things on the way. It was better to be safe than sorry. Otherwise, if he encountered such a situation next time, he would be caught unprepared. He brought back the kettle. As for the water inside, naturally it couldn't be stored in the kettle, but the snow outside. This was fresh water, and it was very clean. After Jiang Hai put some in, he boiled the water and could drink it directly. As for the current situation, it was quite good. After drinking some water, Lilia was more energetic. Looking at Jiang Hai, who was still wearing thin clothes, Lilia pulled Jiang Hai's hand. Come, you also get on the bed. It's cold to sit there. Looking at Jiang Hai, Lilia said with a serious face. It's okay. You don't know how strong my body is. Touching his head, Jiang Hai rejected Lilia's kindness. I have to admit that although there are many people who say that the women around Jiang Hai like him because of his money, it's not that simple. To be honest, apart from money, it was really difficult for Jiang Hai to have the ability to attract other people's attention in an instant. He was indeed a bit unromantic. For example, right now, this was something that only a person who was prepared to be single for 10,000 years would say. Rolling her eyes at Jiang Hai, Lilia didn't let him sit back down. Instead, she forced him to sit on the bed. Then, she gave half of her coat to Jiang Hai, but this coat was still very small. Unknowingly, the two were squeezed together. Chapter 655. Hey, Jiang Hai, how long have I been in your house? Xiaoya lowered her head and leaned against Jiang Hai. Listening to Jiang Hai's breathing, the atmosphere between the two of them became subtle. Xiaoya hugged her knees and asked Jiang Hai. Perhaps it was to ease the awkwardness between them. Oh, I remember that you have been here for half a year. Hearing what Xiaoya said, Jiang Hai also recovered from the slightly ambiguous atmosphere. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. He remembered that the first time he saw Xiao, you should be in early June. At that time, he and Aphrodite still had a pure relationship, and he and Bernice only had a pure cooperative relationship. When Xiaoya came here, he was somewhat unhappy in his heart, but because he agreed, he accepted the two sisters. But he didn't expect that they had been together for more than half a year. The relationship between the two had surpassed the relationship of ordinary friends. As for what would develop, no one knew. Yes, I have been here for half a year, but Jiang Hai, these 6 months have been the happiest I have ever been. I used to just stay in a pure white room alone, either cooking or reading. I had nothing else to do. I couldn't watch TV because TV has radiation. I couldn't play computer games. I couldn't come into contact with the outside world. In that world, only my sister and mother could talk to me, but after coming to the United States, only my sister could talk to me. Listening to Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya rested her head on her knees and said with some sadness. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai felt the overwhelming loneliness. After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai put his hand on Xiaoya's back and whispered, Don't worry, you don't need to think about these things when you come to me. As long as you don't leave, my place will always be your home. You really don't know how to comfort people. Xiaoya glared at Jiang Hai, turned around, picked up Jiang Hai's big hand, and moved it from her back to her shoulder. Then her body leaned into Jiang Hai's arms, and they sat there together, looking at the fire in front of them. Now we're like a couple, leaning together and looking at the fire. After a while, when Jiang Hai felt that his arm was a little numb, Xiaoya suddenly said. This made Jiang Hai, who originally wanted to stretch his arm, give up the idea again. But after hearing what Xiaoya said, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed. What the hell is this? Ahem, this is only temporary. When the snow stops, we can go back. With a dry cough, Jiang Hai said with a slight panic. I know, we will go back when the time comes, but at this time, I really hope that we are really a couple. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya's voice was a little disappointed. Then, she seemed to have thought of something. As she spoke, she raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai. Her small face also turned red at this time. Seeing her appearance, Jiang Hai opened his mouth, but he really didn't know what to say. Jiang Hai, I know about the matter between you and my sister. Can you give my sister the ending she wants? Looking at Jiang Hai, Xiaoya looked at him with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's heart skipped a beat. It had only been a few days since the incident between him and Bernice, and it was discovered by Xiaoya. Sure enough, the paper couldn't wrap the fire, and her question really made Jiang Hai unable to answer. This. Looking at Xiaoya, Jiang Hai's eyes were a little hesitant because he didn't know what to say. You can't, I'll answer for you. Then on the basis that you can't, do you mind adding one more person? Looking at Jiang Hai's somewhat evasive gaze, Xiaoya suddenly sat up and directly sat on Jiang Hai's body. Her pair of eyes reflected the fiery red flames as she stared at Jiang Hai. Although the north wind was whistling outside, a layer of fine sweat appeared on Jiang Hai's forehead at this time. Okay, Xiaoya, don't make a fuss. You're still sick. Stroking Xiaoya's shoulder, Jiang Hai wanted to stand up. Was he born to be pushed down? If that's the case, I'm too miserable. I'm very good now, so... However, Xiaoya slapped away Jiang Hai's hand, gently bit her lips, and suddenly threw herself into Jiang Hai's arms. He had to admit that Xiaoya and Bernice were indeed sisters. Even the way they threw themselves over was similar. Although Xiaoya was small in size, her strength wasn't small. Jiang Hai was afraid that he would hurt her. After struggling for a long time, he lifted Xiaoya up. Looking at the panting Xiaoya in front of him, Jiang Hai immediately stopped her from throwing herself over. You have to think about it. I may not be able to give you anything. Seeing that Xiaoya was about to throw herself over, Jiang Hai immediately said to her, I don't need you to give me anything. Now, give me your child. Looking at Jiang Hai, Xiaoya took off the Ice Queen's clothes from the top. Instantly, Xiaoya's abnormally white and tender body directly appeared in Jiang Hai's line of sight. Compared to other people, her body was much more slender, and her upper body wasn't very plump, but it revealed an unusually cute feeling. It made people want to hold her in their arms and love her. Looking at Jiang Hai's gaze, Xiaoya couldn't help but chuckle. Sure enough, she was also attractive to Jiang Hai. Today, I'm yours. Lying on Jiang Hai's body, Xiaoya said softly, and then kissed Jiang Hai's lips again. Outside, the north wind whistled. In this small wooden house, the atmosphere was a little breathless. In the end, Jiang Hai and Xiaoya broke through the bottom line and went crazy in this small wooden house. Outside, the snow kept falling. Jiang Hai and the others were also trapped in this small wooden house. Fortunately, Jiang Hai and the others brought a lot of food. It snowed for 2 days and 2 nights, and it stopped on the night of the 27th. However, Jiang Hai and the others still spent another night in this small wooden house before returning to the manor. Of course, they couldn't drive their car, and they didn't call anyone to pick them up. This was because the small wooden house they were in was less than an hour away from Jiang Hai's manor. Moreover, the snow here was too thick for a car to pass through. Jiang Hai and Lilia walked back. It was an hour's journey, but they walked for nearly 2 hours. It wasn't until noon on the 28th that they returned to the manor. When they returned to the manor and saw the situation inside, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel angry. These deers were really abominable. Not only did they attack him, but they also destroyed his fence. It's great that you're fine. Promise me, don't go missing again in the future. As soon as they entered the manor, Bernice and the others noticed Jiang Hai and Xiaoya. Bernice didn't say anything and directly hugged her younger sister. She couldn't stop her tears from flowing down. These 2 days she was worried sick. If it weren't for Jiang Hai's call, she might have gone crazy. Fortunately, nothing happened in the end. If something really happened, she might not be able to forgive herself for the rest of her life. Well, sister, I'm fine. Don't worry, this kind of thing won't happen in the future. Xiaoya glanced at Jiang Hai and said to Bernice. However, her tone wasn't that confident, but at this time, Jiang Hai couldn't say anything. After hugging Delina and the others, he went to find Robbins Garcia. Boss, you're finally back. Looking at Jiang Hai, Robbins Garcia also hugged Jiang Hai. He was very worried that something would happen to Jiang Hai. After knowing that Jiang Hai was fine, he was relieved. Okay, Robbins Garcia, I won't die so easily. Is the manor's loss big this time? Is everyone okay? Looking at the slightly agitated Robbins Garcia, Jiang Hai smiled, then looked at his own manor. From his perspective, the situation didn't seem to be too good. Not bad. We came back in time, and nobody was hurt, although we were stuck at home for a few days. As for the damage to the manor, a lot of the fences were damaged. Because of the heavy snow, the deer didn't stay here for too long and left after only 1 day. The cows were a little frightened, but it was still manageable. The fodder storage was very tight, so it wasn't stolen. However, it'll cost tens of thousands of dollars to repair the fences. Robbins Garcia looked at the damaged fence in the distance and said helplessly, These fences were usually electrified to prevent wild animals from entering. But when it was raining or snowing, it couldn't be electrified because children knew that water was conductive. If the fences were electrified when it was snowing or raining, it was very likely to burn the power in the manor. When the time came, the entire manor would be without electricity, and that would be troublesome. Most importantly, if there was a fire, it would be even more troublesome. Because of this, the fences weren't electrified when it was snowing, and these deer took advantage of the fact that the fences weren't electrified to rush in. This is just a small amount of money. It'll be fine if it's repaired soon. Looking at the messy manor, Jiang Hai frowned. Also, Mayor Wallace called last night and said that the town is organizing a deer hunt to chase these guys back into mountains. He asked if we'd like to participate. After thinking for a while, Robbins Garcia brought up the second matter to Jiang Hai. Participate, of course, participate. Jiang Hai wouldn't forget that he was almost killed by those deer. It wasn't his principle to not take revenge. Hearing Jiang Hai's words and seeing the small flames in his eyes, Robbins Garcia laughed. He knew that Jiang Hai would definitely take revenge. After being made so miserable, if he still didn't take revenge, then he wouldn't be Jiang Hai. If you participate, we'll leave after lunch. We'll go to town and hunt deer according to our assigned quota. Robbins Garcia looked at Jiang Hai and said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded. He had to participate no matter what. After returning to the villa, Jiang Hai had a good meal with his family and left them to look after the house. Because the purse seine was broken, Jiang Hai deliberately left Azalina at home just in case. He took Belle Lester, Connerson Peters, the two boys from the Filament family, Lewis Turner and John Turner, and drove his F-650 to town with the Remington shotgun. His men had already called the car repair company, and the car repair company would find a way to take the car away and repair it. When they arrived in town, Jiang Hai found that there were some signs of deer activity in the town. Many people's fences were broken, which showed that these deer were really not kind people. But this year's deer disaster didn't cause too much loss. No one was injured, and that was the most important thing. As for the broken things, the government would subsidize them, so they weren't worried about that. So when Jiang Hai arrived, the atmosphere was quite good. Seeing that Jiang Hai had also come, Mayor Wallace knew that Jiang Hai had been missing for 3 days. After asking and confirming that Jiang Hai was fine, he was relieved. After assigning the people, everyone headed out of town. Mayor Wallace was still very conservative. He divided the people in town who were going out to hunt deer into 3 cars. For example, there were 5 people in Jiang Hai's group, plus a car belonging to a pair of brothers, a total of 3 people. One of them had an 18-year-old child, and there were 4 policemen in a police car. After all, it was illegal to hunt wild animals in the United States. So they needed to record the process of this deer hunt. At least, they couldn't chase the deer into the forest. And most importantly, the weapons also needed to be recorded. For example, Jiang Hai's August couldn't be used. He could only use a shotgun. As soon as they left town, Jiang Hai and the others saw a group of deer. But these deer were different from the hundreds of deer that night. This was just a small group. It looked like there were only 5 or 6 of them. They were digging in the snow outside the town, looking for food to eat. They were very far away, so Jiang Hai picked up the gun. He was ready to send these guys to heaven when they were in range. But these deer were extremely sneaky. As soon as they heard the sound of the engine, a deer instantly raised its head. Then, without making any sound, it jumped in an instant and ran away. As it ran, the other deer also ran away in an instant. It had been snowing for 2 days and 2 nights. In addition, the snow had been exposed to the air for the whole night last night and the whole afternoon this morning. The snow was really not good for driving, especially the snow that had been crushed by the car. It had turned into slush, but the deer could handle it freely in such weather. Chapter 656. Bang! Seeing that the deer herd was about to run away, Jiang Hai fired a shot from a distance. But unfortunately, not to mention the deer, he didn't even shoot down a single hair. The ground was full of snow and mud. Even the F-650 was a little tired, but the deer could naturally pass through here. Who the F asterisk CK? Looking at the white-tailed deer in front of him that was still wagging its tail, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curse. Our most important thing is to drive these guys into the mountains, not really to hunt them. Of course, if they don't leave, then you don't have to be polite, but you are so far away. Are you sure you can hit them? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the police car also came over at this time. Looking at Jiang Hai's somewhat angry look, the police in the police car couldn't help but laugh and talk. Jiang Hai's relationship with the townspeople is more or less tangled, but his relationship with the police is quite solid. After all, when Jiang Hai's manor was attacked, the police station helped a lot, and Jiang Hai also donated a lot of money to the police station. So they don't mind joking with Jiang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai won't care about this. It's useless to talk about that. If you have the guts, then kill a few for me to see. Jiang Hai also said as he looked at the police with contempt. We are supervising. But the police didn't want to get angry with Jiang Hai, so they said with a smile. Facts proved that Jiang Hai soon had a chance to get revenge. The car drove a few hundred meters forward, and they encountered another wave of deer. However, this wave of deer was much larger than the previous wave. There were more than 30 of them, and almost half of them were adult male deer. Among these deer, there were white-tailed deer, reindeer, and moose. After hearing the sound of the engine, these deer didn't escape. Instead, they raised their heads and looked at Jiang Hai. When they found that they were humans, these deer took the initiative to lower their heads and prepared to attack. When Jiang Hai saw this situation, he couldn't help but laugh. He wasn't afraid of these guys fighting back. He was only afraid that these guys would run away. That way, he wouldn't have a chance to take revenge. Looking at the deer in front of him, Jiang Hai directly opened the window, and half of his body directly went out of the car window. Just like in movies, when the villains were chasing after the main characters, they would shoot at the main characters. Jiang Hai's current actions were the same, but it looked really cool. Seeing Jiang Hai's actions, Bell also leaned out. There were 5 people in his car, and Connors and Peters didn't know how to use a gun. John Turner was still young. He was still in college. He was not old enough to play with guns. He was just here to watch the fun. Although Lewis Turner had his own pistol and rifle, he didn't bring them back. Moreover, he was now the driver. Therefore, there were only 2 people in Jiang Hai's car who could shoot. Seeing Jiang Hai's actions, the police and the people in the other pickup couldn't help but secretly curse Jiang Hai. This crazy guy. He wasn't afraid of falling out of the car, but obviously, Jiang Hai and Bell didn't need to worry about this problem. Their legs were enough to fix them the car. Moo! Seeing the 3 cars rushing over, the dozen male deer didn't dodge. Instead, they lowered their heads and directly rushed over. Deer were very timid, but there was an old saying, even a rabbit will bite when it's anxious, let alone a deer. They couldn't survive in the mountains, so they went down the mountain. Now, humans were still driving them into the mountains. This meant that they were going to die. How could they not resist? But for humans, whether they died in the mountains or not, it was good enough that they invaded human territory. If such a scene was seen by some members of animal protection organizations who loved animals, they would probably sacrifice themselves to protect these deer. Unfortunately, there were no such people here at this time. As a slightly larger male deer roared, the dozen deer quickly ran over. Seeing the deer coming over, the 2 cars immediately stopped, opened the doors, and prepared to fight. But Jiang Hai and the others rushed over. When the 2 sides were only about 50 meters apart, Jiang Hai pulled the trigger first. Bang! With a loud sound, the leading male deer couldn't help but tremble. Then its legs went soft, and it screamed and knelt on the snow in front of it. On the other side, Bell also pulled the trigger. With another bang, another stag fell to the ground. When the 2 largest deer fell, the rest of the deer that were rushing over couldn't help but feel scared. They looked at Jiang Hai and Bell in surprise. As for the doe behind them, they were already scared silly. But Jiang Hai and the others weren't. They quickly reloaded the next bullet. In fact, it was just a quick pull. Jiang Hai and Bell pulled the trigger again. This time, 2 more deer fell into a pool of blood. This time, the deer reacted. Their natural cowardice also showed at this time. The remaining male deer, without saying anything, turned around and ran. As the male deer ran, the doe and the fawns also ran. "You bastards, don't run if you have the guts." It turned out that when the deer herd wanted to escape, except for the fawns, Jiang Hai's car couldn't catch up with any deer. But these fawns, Jiang Hai and the others couldn't hunt them. So, looking at the deer herd that had run away in the blink of an eye, Jiang Hai had no other choice but to curse, because the gun in his hand didn't work after 50 meters. Who knows where the deer bullet will fall? So Jiang Hai had to stop the car. Looking at the exasperated Jiang Hai, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but laugh and say, "Okay, Jiang, these guys should know that they were wrong. It's better for them to go back and compete with the Canadian deer herd for territory." Although the outside world is very exciting, it's also dangerous. In fact, Winthrop absolutely hated these deer more than Jiang Hai, but they were already used to it. Next, Jiang Hai and the others continued to look for the deer outside the town. In fact, it turned out that Jiang Hai was actually very unlucky that day. According to the fat policeman, there were about 300 deer that entered Winthrop's territory. After sweeping around, almost half of them had left. The remaining half, which was more than 100, were scattered all over the town. The deer that Jiang Hai met that night was actually the sum of all the deer herds. Deer are also animals, and animals are afraid of the cold. And deer can't wear clothes like humans. They can only huddle together and sleep to resist the cold. If Jiang Hai hadn't appeared there that night, the deer herd would have gathered there for a night and dispersed the next day. Unlike now, Jiang Hai had searched here for a long time. Except for the 2 waves of deer, they didn't find any other deer. Even if Belle followed the deer's footprints for a long time and didn't find anything, the sky was gradually getting dark. "Hey, Jiang, we have to go back to the town. Deer hunting isn't a matter of a day or two. We are at a disadvantage at night." Looking at Jiang Hai, who was still looking around, the policeman here also drove the car over and said to Jiang Hai. Although he was somewhat unwilling, Jiang Hai could only nod his head, indicating that he agreed. Then everyone headed towards the direction of the small town. But just as everyone was about to drive to the town, in a forest, Jiang Hai found a huge guy. As soon as he saw this guy, Jiang Hai's eyes turned red. Following his gaze, it wasn't difficult for everyone to see that in the forest next to the town, there was a huge deer eating the leaves that hadn't fallen off the tree. This deer should be a reindeer, but its size was so big that it made people's hair stand on end. The fork on its head was roughly about 18. This meant that this deer was a very strong male deer. Its huge size allowed this deer to be fearless in the forest. Even brown bears and mountain lions, the top predators in North America. But the only thing that surprised people was that this deer was limping a little. "Mother Faster's cur, I actually bumped into you." Looking at this deer, others were at most amazed, but Jiang Hai hated it so much that his teeth itched. Because even if this deer turned into ashes, Jiang Hai wouldn't recognize it wrongly. This guy was the one who attacked him. Moreover, it didn't give up and attacked him. Finally, after being shot by him, it fled into the forest. But unexpectedly, it didn't return to the Alabama mountains, but continued to stay here and eat. As the saying goes, when enemies meet, their eyes turn red. There was no need to say anything at all. Jiang Hai asked Lewis Turner to stop the car. Then he rushed into the forest with his gun. At this time, the huge reindeer had also heard the sound of the car below. Originally, it was going to hide in the forest, but when it saw Jiang Hai, it naturally met its enemy. Seeing that Jiang Hai dared to come alone to kill it, this big guy also moved. It lowered its head and rushed toward Jiang Hai. Looking at the huge reindeer rushing down from above, Jiang Hai knew that he couldn't fight it head-on. This reindeer was definitely an extraordinarily large fellow. Its body length was almost 2 meters, which was not much different from a moose. Without counting the antlers, it should be about 1.6 meters tall. With the antlers, it was definitely 2 meters tall. Such a big guy rushing toward Jiang Hai. Its power was quite scary, but Jiang Hai was destined to kill it today. Bang! In front of the rushing reindeer, Jiang Hai directly shot. The bullet instantly penetrated the guy's chest, directly beating it up. Its body fell down weakly, but the huge inertia still made it rush toward Jiang Hai. However, at this time, Jiang Hai suddenly turned sideways and dodged to the distance. He watched the reindeer slide down from the top of the mountain. Wow, this is a really big guy. If I didn't look at the antlers, I would have thought it was a moose. The car behind also drove over at this time. Looking at the huge reindeer sliding down, the police couldn't help but say in surprise, "One must know that the reindeer's head is a very good collection, and the reindeer that is hunted now belongs to the hunter." It seems that Jiang Hai's collection will have another very good thing. At this time, Jiang Hai also slid down the hillside. "This damn guy, you are finally dead." Looking at this reindeer, although Jiang Hai was cursing, there was a smile on his face. In the beginning, he was quite embarrassed by this guy, but in the end, only Jiang Hai could stand here with a smile. After venting, Jiang Hai and the others threw the big guy behind the pickup truck. Then, everyone went to the town to count the day's harvest. In Jiang Hai's team, only Jiang Hai harvested 5 reindeer. Because Jiang Hai now has a good relationship with the Iroquois, Jiang Hai donated 3 of the 5 reindeer, and the meat was distributed to the people in the town. As for the heads of the 5 reindeer, they were all made into specimens and all belonged to Jiang Hai. Of course, this will take some time. After returning to the town, Jiang Hai deliberately told Xiaoya that he had killed the big reindeer. After hearing this, Xiaoya was very happy. This was not to say that they were bloodthirsty. After all, those guys almost killed them. It would be strange if they were merciful to them. Anyway, no matter what other people say, Jiang Hai has a deep hatred for these deer. Moreover, he is not a wildlife conservation expert. Compared to protecting these wild animals, he feels that animals are the real good ones when served on the table. In the next few days, Jiang Hai and the others went out to hunt deer, but the number of deer was constantly decreasing. Most of the deer were driven back to the Appalachian Mountains to cause trouble for the Canadian deer. A small number of deer were killed by Jiang Hai and the others. In 3 days, the whole town killed a total of 37 deer, and Jiang Hai's family killed 10 alone. The old people in the town joked that Jiang Hai should be called the deer's nemesis. In any case, December 31st was the last day of the year. During the day, the deer near Winthrop were no longer a threat. All the deer that entered the town had been driven away. There were only a few that did not leave, and they did not pose any threat to the townspeople. Seeing this, Mayor Wallace officially announced the end of the deer hunt. Jiang Hai also took back his ornaments from the Iroquois. They were specimens made of the heads of 10 adult male deer. The heads of these male deer had at least 12 bifurcated heads. Jiang Hai chose to kill these male deer. As for the female deer and the fawns, under normal circumstances, he wouldn't kill them. The heads of these male deer were hung in Jiang Hai's study room on the 2nd floor. When one walked in, it was really scary. After hanging these deer heads, Jiang Hai went downstairs. As soon as he arrived, he smelled a very fragrant smell. "What are we eating tonight? It smells so good." Smelling the aroma, Jiang Hai walked into the kitchen and asked excitedly. Hearing that it was Jiang Hai, Xiaoya turned her head and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. "You hunted so many deer back. It's useless to freeze them at home, so I made venison hot pot. It's very nutritious." Chapter 657. It really wasn't easy to build a ranch in Dubai, at least in Jiang Hai's opinion. In fact, he wasn't too concerned about this business. There wasn't much to say about it. It was indeed a lot worse. If you wanted to build a camel farm in the middle of a desert, there was still a chance, but if you wanted to build a pastoral area, that was bullsh asterisk T. It was precisely because of this that after Du Feynman left, Jiang Hai wasn't too concerned about his pasture business. What he didn't expect was that Du Feynman would actually call him at this moment to tell him that the ranch was done. "Are you sure?" After hearing the news, Jiang Hai looked at his phone with some doubt. It was indeed Du Feynman's number and voice. It didn't seem like he was joking. Did this guy really finish building the ranch? "Of course I'm sure. I wouldn't joke about dollar. If you have time the next few days, come to our place. Although we have a lot of experts in building ranches, we still need your pasture. You're the most important part. If anything happens, all our previous efforts will be wasted." Du Feynman agreed with what Jiang Hai said. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai looked like he was in a daze. He didn't expect Du Feynman to really finish building the ranch. The more people stayed at home, the more unwilling they were to go out, the more afraid they were of strangers, and the less they liked social situations. Jiang Hai had been very comfortable at home these days, so after hearing what Du Feynman said, Jiang Hai's first reaction was to refuse. But the problem was that he was the one who got Du Feynman to build the ranch. If he didn't go, it wouldn't be very good. "Then I'll take a look in the next few days. If I want to go, I'll call you." After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai still decided to go. Hearing that Jiang Hai was coming, Du Feynman was naturally very happy. He patted his chest and told Jiang Hai that since Jiang Hai was here, he would definitely entertain Jiang Hai well and let him look forward to it. Jiang Hai chuckled at Du Feynman's hospitality. However, he indeed had to make a trip to the matter he had caused. After talking to the family, no one objected to Jiang Hai's decision to go to Dubai. In Bernice's view, it was inevitable that Jiang Hai would go to Dubai for work. Since Bernice didn't say anything, the others didn't say anything either. Jiang Hai left the manor in the middle of January after confirming that they would go to the capital in early February and then to Bing City. This time they were going to Dubai. Although Jiang Hai had some trust in Du Feynman, it was the Middle East. Nothing was certain. Therefore, Jiang Hai still took Azalina with him. With this woman around, he didn't need to worry too much about his own safety. Robbins Garcia drove Jiang Hai and Azalina to Boston's General Logan International Airport. Although Boston didn't have a direct flight to Huaxia, there were still flights to Dubai. Emirates Airlines and JetBlue Airlines. However, the price of the ticket was almost $1,000, which was more than 7 or 8,000 RMB. It was much more expensive than Huaxia's flight to the United States. Jiang Hai was taking a first-class flight. A ticket cost $23,000, which was nearly 140,000 RMB. 140,000 RMB was gone after one flight. Moreover, Jiang Hai had to buy 2 tickets to take 2 flights. After sending Jiang Hai and the others to General Logan International Airport, Robbins Garcia left. Jiang Hai and the others also entered the VIP lounge and boarded there. Dubai was actually not far from Huaxia, but it was still quite far from the United States. Jiang Hai's flight took a total of 12 hours before landing at Dubai Airport. This was called Dubai Airport, and it was also the largest airport in Dubai. Jiang Hai and Azalina also walked out of the airport. As soon as they walked out of the airport, Jiang Hai felt the sun in Dubai. However, it was not the same as the desert sun in his imagination. At this time, Dubai was quite cool. This was also the most suitable time of the year to visit Dubai. The sun was shining in the sky, but the temperature was not high. In January, the average daily temperature in Dubai was 24 degrees and the lowest was 14 degrees. In addition, it was close to the sea, so the sea breeze was quite cool. Although the sun was a little too strong, this was indeed a tourist season. Jiang Hai saw tourists from all over the world at the airport. As soon as they left the airport, they kept taking photos. Jiang Hai was the same. He kept taking photos with his mobile phone and shared them with his friends to anger those people. As for Azalina, she stood calmly behind Jiang Hai. There's so many people, so she had to do a good job of security. "Mr. Jiang Hai, right? Hello, I am Mr. Du Feynman's bodyguard. Mr. Du Feynman is waiting for you in the parking lot over there." But at this time, a man in a black suit came over. As soon as he walked in, Azalina had already appeared in front of Jiang Hai and separated him from Jiang Hai. Fortunately, this bodyguard knew when to advance and retreat. When he was 2 meters away from Jiang Hai, he stopped and respectfully said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked in the direction he came from. When he saw this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but curl his lips. He was quite sure that Du Feynman had indeed come to pick him up, because at this time, there was a row of cars in the distance. And in this fleet, there was only one kind of car, Rolls-Royce. Who would play like this except for the Middle Eastern tycoons? Of course, These cars weren't all the same. Otherwise, how could they show off Du Feynman's difference? These Rolls-Royces were all black, and only one was white. There were a lot of gold decorations on the outside. The car was also longer than the other Rolls-Royces. Needless to say, this car must be Du Feynman's. Then Jiang Hai followed the bodyguard with Azalina. When they came to the front of the fleet, Jiang Hai found that there was a circle of people standing outside the fleet. These people were all like the bodyguard, wearing black suits, separating the crowd from the fleet. It looked really ostentatious. When Jiang Hai came over, the back door of the white Rolls-Royce that had been closed was also opened by a bodyguard. Then he saw Du Feynman, who was wearing the traditional clothes of the Arab countries, walking out with a smile. "Hey, my dear Jiang Hai, you are finally here." Seeing Jiang Hai, Du Feynman was very excited and shouted loudly, "Hey bro, dear is not used here." After hugging Du Feynman, Jiang Hai also said with a smile, "Is that so? Haha, well, I am indeed not got one. Let's go, bro. Take a look at the team I have carefully prepared for you." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman said with a smile. Then he led Jiang Hai to the back seat of his Rolls-Royce. As for Azalina, she sat in the car behind this one. In Du Feynman's car, besides the driver, there were only the two of them. The others were not qualified to sit there. It should be known that in this world, the United States should be the most liberal country. Americans were the product of racial integration. This country had Huaxia, British, Indian, French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, South American, and so on. Every country and every race had its own culture and history. If everything was carried out according to the culture of each race, wouldn't it be depressing? Talking to the British all the time, kissing the French when they met, and bowing to the Japanese when they met? Wouldn't it be exhausting? Therefore, Americans were a very free country with no customs. This was the product of racial integration. But the Arabians were different. Although they were not looking for trouble, their teachings were sometimes a little, haha. Especially in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates was a joint emirate. It was not a complete country. The division of ranks and classes was quite strict. The one who controlled the lifeline of the whole country was none other than the royal family. What GC? What democracy? They were nothing here. Here, whoever was the emperor was the most powerful. This was not a constitutional monarchy, but a complete monarchy. Although Du Feynman was not the emperor, according to Huaxia, he was considered a prince. Even if he could not be given the title of King I, it was not a problem to be given the title of King II. Therefore, in Dubai, he was much nobler than the average king. Even the bodyguards who were here to protect his safety were not allowed to sit in his car, especially when there was no crisis. The reason why Jiang Hai could sit here was that he was not a citizen of this country. Secondly, he was Du Feynman's friend. Thirdly, Jiang Hai's identity was not ordinary. He was a billionaire and had a relationship with the higher-ups of Huaxia. There was no need to say more. "Brother, we have the most fun here recently. You will definitely love our place." The motorcade slowly drove away. Du Feynman also laughed and said to Jiang Hai, for him, there was no place better than Dubai. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not think that other places were better than Winthrop. This was the so-called territorial awareness. He thought that wherever he could control was the best. Ordinary people could only control their own homes. Therefore, there was an old saying that one's own doghouse was not as good as gold or silver. The weather here is really good. You have to do your part as the host. Opening the window, Jiang Hai looked at the buildings around the city and could not help but laugh. Of course, the most eye-catching in his eyes should be the legendary Burj Khalifa. It was really too high. This is necessary. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman also said with a smile. Not to mention the friendship between the two, he also needed Jiang Hai's help. How could he not treat Jiang Hai well? This was simply impossible. The car that the two were in was constantly speeding on the road. Even if they encountered a red light, they would not stop. Dubai's traffic police would clean up their mess. This lawless attitude made Jiang Hai very envious. He was the local tyrant of Winthrop. However, he still had to abide by the law. It seemed that the ordinary rich people were indeed a lot worse than these nouveau riche royals. After speeding for about half an hour, The car stopped in front of a large villa. After getting out of the car, Jiang Hai looked at the Middle Eastern-style villa in front of him and could not help but nod. The style was not bad, but the problem was that it seemed to be a little too white. Perhaps the people here liked white. However, Jiang Hai did not dislike white. Thinking about Xiaoya, he still liked white, whether it was the people or the buildings. While looking at the villa, Du Feimin also came out from the other side. This is where you will stay when you are here. This is one of my villas in Dubai. It is not very big. Do you mind? Du Feimin said with a smile as he patted Jiang Hai's shoulder. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai could not help but roll his eyes. This is not very big. The villa in front of him was almost the same size as his main villa, and this was only one of his villas in Dubai. Sigh, I should learn not to talk to nouveau riches when I have nothing to do. Otherwise, I will often be affected. Come in. The party I prepared for you is inside. Ignoring Jiang Hai's rolling eyes, Du Feimin put his arm around Jiang Hai's shoulder and walked into the villa. When the door opened, Jiang Hai's eyes unconsciously widened. Oh my God, what the hell is this? Looking at the situation in front of him, Jiang Hai's face was filled with confusion. Welcome, Lord Du Feimin, Lord Jiang Hai. In Jiang Hai's line of sight, there were countless, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds of girls wearing very simple bikinis, clothes. Black, white, yellow, all kinds of skin colors, tall, short, thin, petite, cute, countless beauties. After seeing the door open and Jiang Hai and Du Feimin walking in, they all bowed 90 degrees and said loudly. Looking at them, Jiang Hai was completely confused. What the hell is this? I specially prepared these girls for you. Looking at the girls in your villa, I know that you like them very much. These girls are all yours. You can do whatever you want. Looking at Jiang Hai's confused look, Du Feimin raised his eyebrows and said. Jiang Hai, on the other hand, was speechless as he looked at him. Was he a perverted demon in his eyes? Besides, even if I have the heart in the face of so many girls, I feel that I may be hollowed out. However, Du Feimin didn't give Jiang Hai a chance to refute, and directly waved his hand and said loudly, Come, ladies. This is your master for these few days, Jiang Hai. Next, let me see you use your broad hearts to take care of your master. After these girls heard his words, they all smiled and ran over. Then, Jiang Hai walked into the villa. Jiang Hai didn't even have a chance to resist. Of course, under such circumstances, resistance was quite unnecessary. Chapter 658. Boss. Jiang Hai was gently woken up by a familiar voice. However, as soon as he opened his eyes, Jiang Hai felt an extreme headache. He knew that this was a symptom caused by the excessive stimulation of alcohol and hormones. Yesterday was really too crazy. After Jiang Hai and Du Feimin entered the villa, Jiang Hai was pulled away. Then Du Feimin left, leaving only Jiang Hai. While enjoying the delicacies that Du Feimin sent over, he also enjoyed so many hot beauties. When men and women met under such circumstances, it naturally became the only law. These women quickly took off their simple clothes and then licked Jiang Hai's body from all over his body. Jiang Hai had never enjoyed such a feeling before. He did not know how many women he had F***ed last night, and how many times he had F***ed. According to his memory, there were probably no less than 20 people. According to his estimation, his elder brother might have entered the bodies of no less than 50 people in the end, but he could not remember the specific situation. Of course, he could not have F***ed 50 people directly. If he did that, even he would not be able to withstand it. Drinking wine and eating while F***ing women. Such a life was really rotten to the extreme. It seemed that Jiang Hai only fell asleep after 11 o'clock in the evening. Rather than saying that he fell asleep, it was better to say that he fainted. To be honest, he had slept until now. The aftereffects were still very strong. It would be strange if those rich people who played like this every day were healthy. What's the matter? After rubbing his temples, Jiang Hai sat up from the bed and glanced at the unusually large bed. However, at this time, it was already empty, leaving only him and Azalina, who had woken him up. Mr. Du Feimin is already downstairs. Didn't he say that he would take you to Dubai to have fun today? Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina chuckled, then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai nodded, then jumped out of bed. Although he still felt a little weak under his feet, after resting for a while, he felt much better. After washing his face and brushing his teeth, Jiang Hai went downstairs and found that Du Feimin had been waiting here for a long time. After apologizing, the two smiled and left. Compared to the situation when he went to pick up Jiang Hai yesterday, Du Feimin was much more low-key today. The long motorcade was gone and replaced by 3 cars. 2 of them were for the bodyguards, and 1 was for them. Because Azalina would be a little uncomfortable with other cars, Jiang Hai deliberately mentioned that she could sit in the front passenger seat. Originally, Du Feimin would not sit in the same car with the bodyguards, but Azalina was not only a bodyguard but also Jiang Hai's woman, so it didn't matter if he made an exception. However, although the motorcade was smaller, the cars were still the same cars, Rolls-Royce, the symbol of the nouveau riche. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai and the others did not go sightseeing, but went to eat first. Yesterday, Jiang Hai had already seen the food in Dubai. Today, he saw it again, and it was really good. The food in Dubai was a combination of the characteristics of Bahrain, Ilang, Morocco, Ethiopia, Zulia, Bajadin, and India. After all, it was a tourist city. Of course, there were also various specialties of the United Arab Emirates. For example, the famous Arabian roast chicken, Arabian desserts, Arabian roast beef, roast lamb, and so on. Speaking of which, Arabian food was somewhat similar to Western food. It was also divided into appetizers, soup, salad, barbecue, desserts, beef, mutton, and so on. Now, Du Feimin was going to take Jiang Hai to the Sailing Hotel, the only 7-star hotel in the world. They had only heard of its reputation before, but they had never eaten in it. In this hotel, there were a total of 2 restaurants that were indispensable. The best restaurant was called the Immerse Submarine Restaurant, located at the bottom of the Sailing Hotel. Du Feimin naturally had to clear it out when he came to eat. After all, this was the real power of the royal family in Dubai. However, if other people came to eat, it would be a little troublesome. If a tour group came to eat here, if they booked online, the price would be $410 per person. If they came with a tour group, it would be 765 dirhams, equivalent to 1,300 renminbi per person. However, there were only 3 dishes, and individual customers could not enjoy this. Generally, lunch and dinner needed to be booked. It was normal for 2 people to spend 4,000 to 5,000 RMB for a meal here. This was assuming that they could not eat anything good. If they came to eat like Jiang Hai and Du Feimin, it would cost at least a few 100,000 RMB. This was because the fish that Du Feimin ordered alone was worth 50,000 renminbi. It was a complete sume, which was also known as the rippled lip fish, an extremely rare species in the world. In the United States, no one dared to catch it, let alone eat it. However, here, Du Feimin had the final say. One had to admit that the environment of this restaurant was really amazing. Sitting there, the world under the sea was right next to them. Coral and fish swam around, and the transparency was extremely high. It made people feel as if they were eating in an aquarium. The feeling was really good. In addition to this restaurant, the restaurant on the top floor was also a must. However, this was the place that Du Feimin had arranged for the evening. During the day, they could enjoy the sea view underwater, and at night, they could go to the top floor to enjoy the night view. This was something that rich people should enjoy. After this meal, Du Feimin took Jiang Hai to tour Dubai. There were still many things to visit in Dubai. For example, the Burj Khalifa, which was actually called the Burj Khalifa. The Burj Khalifa was just a nickname given by tourists. The tallest building in the world was still quite intimidating. In addition, the beach outside the Burj Khalifa was also a popular place for tourists. In addition, the artificial Palm Island, which was known as the 8th wonder of the world, was also very beautiful. There was also the Jumeirah Mosque, the Miracle Garden, and the World Trade Center. In addition, there was also the Taj Arabia. This was also a recent plan in Dubai. They spent 665 million pounds, about 8 billion renminbi, to replicate the Taj Mahal. The size of the replica Taj Mahal was not only 5 times the size of the historical original, but it also had restaurants, a shopping center, a 5-star hotel with 300 rooms, as well as serviced apartments, a bridal shop, and other service facilities. It could be said that once this was completed, it would instantly become one of the best places for rich people to get married. Of course, the premise was that you were rich. When it came to Dubai, shopping was the most important thing. There were many things to visit, but the most attractive thing was shopping. There were many large shopping malls in Dubai, but because Dubai was a duty-free zone, it was the cheapest place for goods from all over the world. It was much cheaper than Hong Kong. To attract business, Dubai would hold some discount events at different times every year. For example, from June to July, this year's new spring clothes had just entered the market, and last year's clothes will be sold off at a cheaper price. December to February of the next year, which was now. This was a plan for next year's spring clothing. During this period, many large shopping centers would have discounts. In addition to the duty-free shops and famous brands, the most attractive places in Dubai were its gold market and spice market. In the spice market, the most famous spice was saffron. As mentioned earlier, saffron had nothing to do with Tibet. These plants were probably produced in Shanghai, and they were originally not local plants. Instead, they were imported from the Middle East and India. In China, saffron was a medicine and must be soaked in water. But in Dubai, saffron was only a spice, although it was still very expensive. As for the gold market, it was even more famous. Dubai was the most famous gold distribution center. 1/10 of the world's gold transactions took place here. The people of Dubai really liked gold. The gold ornaments here were of good quality and were much cheaper than in China. This was mainly because of the Arabian customs. In Dubai, the bigger the gold ornament, the better it was. When getting married, it was necessary to wear gold all over the body. When getting married, it was necessary to wear a few sets of gold ornaments. Otherwise, people would look down on them. With such a custom, there would be a market. That was how Dubai's gold market slowly developed. It was really quite scary. Even on the streets, there were gold vending machines. It was like selling drinks in China. It was hard to understand. Were they not afraid that someone would come and smash the machines? But Du Feynman's words made Jiang Hai understand immediately. Because it was illegal to smash the machines in Dubai, and the degree of the crime depended on the mood of the royal family. In other words, the law was not accurate. Maybe you killed a person, but the royal family was in a good mood and only sentenced you to 3 years. It was also possible that you spat on the ground and the royal family was in a bad mood, so they directly executed you. Of course, this was just an example. If the royal family was really so reckless, there would be chaos here. Everything was governed by the law. Most of the time, the royal family was too lazy to destroy the integrity of the people. While walking, Jiang Hai looked around. Unknowingly, it was time for a day of sightseeing. Jiang Hai and the others also sat in a car and went to the sailing hotel. At night, Du Feynman booked the top floor to entertain Jiang Hai. But on the way back, Jiang Hai found a lot of homeless people on the roadside. Some of the commoners did not seem to have a good life. He found that Dubai was not as rich as he had imagined. Indeed, the rich were very rich, but the poor were much more than he had imagined. In the past, there was a saying in China that one could become rich by picking up trash here. Now, it seemed to be nonsense. The environment here was not suitable for humans to live in. The gap between the rich and poor is really big. Jiang Hai said to Du Feynman as he looked at the people outside the car. Those people are not from Dubai. Du Feynman shrugged and said helplessly. This made Jiang Hai feel a little strange. Those people are foreigners who came to work. There are no poor people in Dubai. This is related to our country's policy. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Du Feynman could not help but explain with a smile. According to him, there were no poor people in Dubai. The premise was that you had to be from Dubai. In Dubai, you did not need to worry about a house, because from the moment you were born, you would be assigned a 1,000 to 1,500 square meter piece of land for free. This land completely belonged to you. You could build a house on it, and it would be yours for a long time. But this had to wait. It was not something you could get when you were born. You had to apply for it, and then queue. If you started queuing from the moment you were born, it would be approved when you were about 30 years old. At that time, you could build a house on it. As for the money to build a house, you had to earn it yourself. But for the people of Dubai, this was not a difficult thing. Because of the Dubai government's rules, no matter what kind of job it was, even if it was sweeping the floor, washing dishes, cleaning, no matter what kind of job it was, the minimum wage in Dubai was 17,000 renminbi, and the poverty line in Dubai was 37,000 renminbi a month. In other words, if you were a healthy person in Dubai, as long as you went out to work, you could earn at least 50,000 renminbi a month. This was also the starting salary of a university graduate. 50,000 renminbi was the same as the monthly salary of 3,000 renminbi in China. If you were old and still wanted to go out to work, you could earn more than 20,000 renminbi a month. This was the reality. If you used the construction team in Huaxia to build a house, although it was much more expensive than in China, the people of Dubai who earned more than 1 million RMB a year only needed to save for a year. This kind of government policy made it so that there were not many people in Dubai. Therefore, in Dubai, wanting to become a citizen was not an easy thing. First, you have to be religious. Secondly, you have to have the ability to immigrate. Like Jiang Hai, it didn't matter. He had more than 1 billion, and it was more than 1 billion a year. He would be welcomed wherever he wanted to go. However, Dubai did not accept skilled immigrants. To be honest, it was not very desirable for women to obtain citizenship through marriage. First, you had to believe in the religion here. Second, you had to allow your husband to fool around without any complaints. You also had to share your husband with 3 other women. When you went out, you had to wrap yourself thickly and not take off your veil. You could only show your face to your husband. You could not go out to work or play. If you were beaten to death by your husband, your death would be in vain. If your husband beat you, you had to endure it because the law did not support divorce for women. It was useless even if you sued him. All in all, if a man wanted to immigrate to Dubai, it was very troublesome. If he did not have a few billion RMB in his pocket or the top international academic ability, it was almost impossible to immigrate to Dubai. It was easy for a woman to immigrate, but she had to endure hardships. Unless you could endure it just for the sake of money until the man died, then you could remarry. Chapter 659. It was undeniable that the laws and customs of Dubai were quite beneficial to men. Listening to this, Jiang Hai had some thoughts of joining this place, but he quickly rejected it. He could only eat beef and mutton. Jiang Hai couldn't stand it. If they didn't let him eat pork, he would die of discomfort. The restaurant on the top floor of the Sailboat Hotel was called Sky View Bar. The Sailboat Hotel wasn't the Burj Khalifa. The hotel was only 200 meters high. It wasn't particularly high. After taking the elevator up, Jiang Hai and Du Feimin also had a good meal. When sending Jiang Hai back, Du Feimin asked Jiang Hai if he needed to call the girls back at night. He also asked if they needed to go to the ranch in 3 days. It would take 2 days to go to the ranch. He wanted to take advantage of these 2 days to finish his work. During the 3 days that Jiang Hai would stay here, he couldn't accompany Jiang Hai, so he asked if Jiang Hai needed anything. As for women, Jiang Hai didn't mind. His legs were still a little weak. As for his request, Jiang Hai asked for a car. Of course, he didn't ask for a car. They also wanted to go out and have a look. It would be more convenient to have a car. Hearing Jiang Hai's request, Du Feimin had nothing to say and agreed. After sending Jiang Hai and Azalina back to the villa, he left. Jiang Hai and Azalina slept in separate rooms. This was also Azalina's request. Although she could give her body to Jiang Hai at any time, she was now on a mission. She had to protect Jiang Hai's safety. Therefore, she couldn't be distracted for even a second. Therefore, if Jiang Hai wanted it, they could wait until they returned to Winthrop. Azalina didn't feel safe in Winthrop. The next morning, when Jiang Hai and Azalina woke up, they found a sports car in front of the villa. This was the car that Du Feimin gave to Jiang Hai. Looking at the sports car, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He just wanted to find a means of transportation, but it seemed that Du Feimin thought too much. He wasn't going out to flirt, so why would he get such a good car? Bugatti Veyron, a famous sports car brand in France. Jiang Hai didn't need any data to make up the number of words. This kind of thing could be found on the internet. The selling price in China was 25 million renminbi. Of course, even so, this car was rare in China. However, for a tycoon like Du Feynman, this was just a car. That's all, it was just a car. It was just a gift for Jiang Hai. Although he smiled bitterly and shook his head, Jiang Hai didn't want to change to an ordinary car. It was a sports car. Although it wasn't his first time sitting in one, it was his first time driving. After sitting in the car with Azalina, Jiang Hai sped toward Dubai. To be honest, Dubai wasn't small, and there were many places to visit. Jiang Hai didn't encounter any dramatic events. 3 days passed by quickly. During these 3 days, he also learned a little about Dubai. Of course, it wasn't as scary as the legends he heard in China. In the past, Jiang Hai heard that when he played in Dubai, he would often meet some rich people. Some said that beautiful women would be given a Louis Vuitton bag when they went out and smiled. Some said that when they went out to play in the desert, they would meet a local, and because they chatted happily, they would receive a sports car the next day. Jiang Hai responsibly told everyone that this was all nonsense. Maybe they would really give it to him, but these people's motives were obviously not pure. When a man gave a woman something, it was nothing more than one thing. He wanted to be with the woman. Bags and cars were the best things. There were also the buildings here, the residential areas piled up on the sea, the revolving skyscrapers with different windows, and the palace-like hotels. There were all of them here, including the ones that were under construction. However, most of these things were just for show. At least in the eyes of a pragmatist like Jiang Hai, these things were actually useless. The most important thing was that Dubai's tourism development now seemed to be a failure. There were too many unfinished buildings near the city. Many of them were built by developers from Huaxia. It was said that during the summer in Dubai, the hottest temperature could reach 50 degrees. Every year, many construction workers died from the heat. He really didn't know if it was necessary for them to earn this money. Moreover, this money was so cheap in the eyes of the locals. As for the luxury cars in Dubai, there were indeed many, but not as many as one would imagine, especially on the road. The rich in Dubai were rich. They had more than one car. It was just like what Jiang Hai learned in the United States. What kind of car was used for what purpose? In Dubai, sports cars and whatnot were driven at night when they went to play. When they went to work, they mainly used cars. Jiang Hai did see the Lamborghini police car, but there were only a few of them. But even so, most of the police cars here were worth more than 1 million yuan. They were really very luxurious. If they were scratched, how painful would it be? There were also the legendary pets raised by the rich in Dubai. There were indeed tigers, lions, leopards, and so on. Just like Du Feynman, he said that he raised a lot of these beasts. However, these beasts were all brought over from Africa. This was because he had a nature reserve in Africa. He paid for the construction of this nature reserve. Other than him, no one was allowed to enter this place to poach. He would also hire locals to be rangers and give them money and top-notch equipment. Although this was somewhat inappropriate, the local government in Africa was still very welcoming of such tycoons. After all, if he played alone, how many could he kill? Now, not only did he protect these animals, but he also solved the problems of the people and employees. Compared to the disadvantages, the benefits were much more. However, this was Du Feynman. Other people did not have such good benefits. They could only buy pets in pet stores. In fact, it could also be called the black market. Most people raised 2 types of pets, peacocks and camels. Lions, tigers, and the like were really rare. Jiang Hai also inquired about the price of a lion. A male lion was $50,000, a female lion was $30,000, a lion cub was $10,000 to $20,000, and a white lion was $80,000. A tiger's price was about the same as a lion's, and a leopard was even cheaper than them. To be honest, Jiang Hai was quite interested in these beasts. Unfortunately, he could not bring them back even if he bought them here. In the end, he could only sigh. It seemed that he had no fate with these beasts. However, there seemed to be a nest of mountain lions in his manor. These days, he also heard some things about the culture here. The conflict between the locals and the foreigners was quite big. The locals' wages were quite high, and the work intensity was quite low. There was almost no difficulty. However, the foreigners' work intensity was high, and their wages were much lower than the locals. Moreover, there was no guarantee. Even if a local skipped work to play outside or eat outside, as long as he clocked in as usual, he would not be fired. This was the case even if he slept during work. However, if a foreigner was slightly dissatisfied, he would be fired. One did not worry about scarcity, but about uneven distribution. This was the current situation here. As for seeing a doctor and going to school, the locals had the advantage. When the locals went to the public hospital to see a doctor, other than the registration fee and some medical equipment, such as gauze, all the rest of the medicine, surgery fees, and so on were free. They did not have to spend money. Even lunch in the hospital was free. This was the advantage of the locals. However, the locals had money, so they were more willing to spend money to see a doctor at a private hospital. It was the same for going to school. In public schools, the teachers were quite good to the local students. This was because a local in Dubai could marry 4 wives. No one knew which big family he was related to. Moreover, the people in Dubai were quite unreasonable. They helped their relatives to the extreme. If his child did not do well in the exam, it was the teacher's responsibility. If he did not teach well, he could pack up and leave with a call. If his child made trouble, spoke in class, smashed things, and so on, it was the teacher's responsibility. He could pack up and leave with a call. If his child fought in school, it was fine if he won, but if he lost, it was the teacher's responsibility. Why didn't the teacher catch the other child and let his child beat him up? This was the teacher's responsibility, so he could pack up and leave. Therefore, in Dubai, basically only the local teachers dared to teach the local students. The foreign teachers mostly stayed in schools, such as foreign languages. They did not dare to have any special thoughts about the local children. They would even take the initiative to help the local children cheat in the exam just to get a good result. However, some children were even too lazy to cheat. The teacher also had to help write the answers and then change the score. This could be said to be the most depressing place in the world as a teacher. These days, wherever Jiang Hai went, he would hear about the conflicts between the locals and foreigners. However, Jiang Hai just smiled. These things had nothing to do with him, and he was not willing to get involved. He believed that Du Feynman and the others knew about these things. Since they knew and still allowed the people to behave like this, they must have their own ideas. To put it simply, their power was given to them by the people of Dubai. If there was chaos, it would originate from the locals of Dubai. If a foreigner did not have a good life in Dubai, he could leave if he did not want to stay. Who would stop him? If he wanted to rebel, then they would have a reason to suppress him. As long as the locals did not bomb the temple, the foreigners had nothing to do with them. It could be said that the foundation of their rule was the locals. There is no such thing as fairness in a bowl of water. However, even so, there were still a large number of foreigners in Dubai. This was because their wages and benefits were much less than the locals in Dubai. However, there was one thing that they could not avoid. Even if the number of foreigners here was much less than the locals here, compared to their lives in their respective countries, it was much better. For example, Huaxia people. In China, an IT staff in their 30s, even if they were a department manager, could earn $500,000 to $1 million a year. However, for the same position, their income in Dubai could reach $5 million to $10 million. The environment here was better. Although the money spent was more than the locals, it was much less than in China. The education was also much better than in China. Although the environment was hot, it was much better than in China in terms of economy and people's livelihood. Whether it was food, accommodation, transportation, medical care, education, people's livelihood, economy, etc., all aspects were better than in China. Therefore, even if it was unequal, they would still come. This was the reality. The welfare in Europe, except for a few small countries, was not as good as here. Therefore, there was nothing much to say. If it was unequal, then so be it. Even if it was unequal, they would still come to make money. In 3 days, Jiang Hai had gained some understanding of this place. He also bought a lot of things. Basically, they were all branded bags and clothes. There was also a lot of gold, a lot of gold. He sent most of these things back to Winthrop. Zhang Tai kept some gifts with him because he would give them to Qi Li Feng Yunshun, Ai Xiaoxi, Qi Li's mother, Bernice, Xiaoya, Delina, and Marian when he returned to China. Zhang Tai was going to give some gifts to Qi Li, Feng Yunshun, Ai Xiaoxi, Qi Li's mother, Bernice, Xiaoya, Delina, and Marian. As for Azalina, she was in a favorable position. Jiang Hai bought several sets of clothes for her, but she sent them back to Winthrop. The prices of luxury goods here were indeed much cheaper than those in New York. 3 days passed in a flash. On the 5th morning of Jiang Hai's arrival in Dubai, Du Feimin, who had disappeared for 3 days, appeared again. This time, he still brought a fleet of 12 cars, but they were no longer the Rolls-Royce used by the rich. Instead, they were all SUVs. There were 11 out-of-print Hummer H2S, which were known as the best SUVs in the world. It was not easy to see so many of them now. In addition, there was also a car that Jiang Hai was very familiar with, the Battle Shield. "You also got this car?" Touching the door of the car, Jiang Hai said to Du Feimin with some nostalgia. "I saw that you look good, so I got one after I came back." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai curled his lips. Seeing that he drove well, he got one. "Sai, when can I be so good?" After seeing the motorcade, Jiang Hai and the others didn't speak much nonsense because the place they were going to was quite far. After getting in the car, the motorcade drove out of Dubai's city limits and headed towards the desert. Chapter 660. What the F***CK? Jiang Hai shouted in surprise as he grabbed the upper left handle. To be honest, even in winter, the desert was not a fun place. The wind would blow sand all over one's face, and the temperature was particularly hot. Therefore, as soon as they entered the desert, they closed the windows. It was somewhat suffocating, but fortunately, there was air conditioning and ventilation, which was not bad. But another point was that there was no road in the desert. If they wanted to walk, they had to pass through the sand dunes. To be honest, it was too much of a scam. The degree of shaking was actually no less than riding a roller coaster. And the most important thing was that this thing did not give them any sense of security. Jiang Hai had just crashed into a tree a few days ago, and now he felt that the car would flip over at any time. It was really too much of a scam. "Don't worry, there's no need to make a fuss. This is actually just an appetizer." Hearing Jiang Hai shouting, Du Feimin couldn't help but laugh. Indeed, compared to Jiang Hai's terrain, he was already used to it and sat very steadily. After driving for about half an hour, the car slowly stopped. As soon as the car stopped, Jiang Hai directly pushed open the door and walked out. He lay on the ground and panted heavily. The road here was too much of a scam. Was this a joke? How could it be so fierce? Looking at Jiang Hai lying on the ground, Du Feimin also walked out and said with a smile, "Hey, you're really strange. I thought I wouldn't be able to stand on the ground alive, but where is your ranch? Why can't I see it?" After lying on the ground for about 2 minutes, Jiang Hai recovered, but after standing up and looking around, he found that he was still surrounded by a desert. "Is Du Feimin playing with me? What the hell is this? Where's the ranch?" The ranch is in the middle of the desert. In fact, to be honest, we are still at the edge of the desert. There are still 2 hours of driving. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai's face turned dark. 2 hours? Why did you stop the car now? Although his face was particularly dark, Jiang Hai still had to ask, what kind of method was this? "We're stopping now to let the air out of the tires. Actually, we haven't entered the desert yet. We still have to walk on the road ahead. It's much more interesting than the front. If the air in the tires is too full, it will be difficult to maintain balance. You have to let some air out to make the tires softer so that it's easier to move forward." Hearing Jiang Hai's doubts, Du Feimin also shared some knowledge with him. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's face dripped with cold sweat. He had no other thoughts. Are you kidding me? This is just an appetizer? The real main course was yet to come. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai swore in his heart that he would not come here if he had nothing to do. Well, even if he had something to do, he would not come here. The city of Dubai was quite fun, but this place was too deceptive. Why didn't you come here by helicopter? Looking at Jiang Hai's ashen face, Azalina, who was not affected, could not help but walk over and pat his back. She knew that her boss was frightened by this statement. Then, she looked at Du Feynman and said doubtfully, "It's not that I don't want to, but it's because in the desert, it's just like in the sea. There might be a storm at any time, and helicopters can't fly high. If we're unlucky and encounter a storm, then we're dead. There's no airport on the ranch, so there's no way to land, so we can only drive here." Hearing Azalina's words, Du Feynman spread his hands and explained to Jiang Hai. However, Jiang Hai did not know how much of this was true. But since they were already here, Jiang Hai could not go back directly. So, after resting for a while, he got on the car again and experienced the feeling of this box-type roller coaster. Fortunately, this driver was indeed the best driver. Although the journey was very thrilling, and some slopes were even more than 70 degrees, the car did not stop. But the car didn't overturn, and it drove very steadily. Following the car, Jiang Hai and the others jumped over sand mountains and seas. About 2 hours later, when the car stopped again, Jiang Hai climbed out of the car. Now, he didn't vomit, which was quite difficult. After retching for a long time, Jiang Hai did not care about how hot the sand on the ground was. He directly lay on the ground and did not want to get up again. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Du Feynman sat in the car amused. He knew that Jiang Hai would not be able to recover for a while, so he would not get out of the car and be exposed to the sun now. After about 10 minutes, Jiang Hai slowly got up from the ground. Seeing Jiang Hai get up, Du Feynman also got out of the car and took the initiative to walk in front of Jiang Hai. He patted his back and brushed off the sand on it. "I won't come again in the future. No matter what you say, I won't come again." Jiang Hai waved his hand and looked at Du Feynman firmly. "You're too weak. Actually, you'll get used to it after a while." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman smiled and said to him. After the two chatted for a while, Jiang Hai also looked into the distance. This time, he saw a ranch in the distance. Looking at this ranch, even Jiang Hai had to admit that the Dubai royal family was indeed rich. At this time, in Jiang Hai's eyes, their ranch should be a giant oasis, covering an area of about hundreds of thousands of acres. Outside the green there was a layer of electrified wall. This was the same as Jiang Hai's manor. Behind the wall, there were several rows of huge trees used to block the wind and sand. Inside the trees, there was a green grassland. "Wow, you're really generous." Looking at the endless ranch in front of him, Jiang Hai was honestly shocked. Worthy of the legendary Dubai royal family, they were indeed more generous than Jiang Hai. This place was originally a small oasis with a very rich underground water source. "Since I came back from your place, I used the power of the whole country to expand this oasis. The trees outside are the most effective in blocking the wind and sand. The outermost layer is a palm tree, below it is a date palm tree, and the inner layer is a date palm tree. The fruit of this kind of tree tastes pretty good." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman also introduced the oasis. The land we're stepping on is all flown in from the most fertile Australia. It's covered with the sea mud of the Persian Gulf, and the grass planted on it is emperor bamboo grass. I can say that everything is prepared according to the best pasture, but the most important thing is still your grass. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman said while walking. It was obvious that he really valued this project. Jiang Hai also glanced at the so-called emperor bamboo grass. There was no emperor bamboo grass in Jiang Hai's manor, but it did not prevent him from hearing about this grass. Emperor bamboo grass, known as the royal family of the pasture, was the strongest pasture. It was a cross between elephant grass and North American wolf's tail grass. In the ranch, this grass was recognized as the best pasture in the world. It grew quickly, was rich in nutrients, and had good effects. However, Jiang Hai's manor did not have it, because this grass was not suitable for Winthrop. The living habits of this kind of pasture were more deceptive. It was only suitable for tropical and subtropical planting. The sun required more than 1,000 hours of sunshine per year. The altitude range was okay, and it could be planted at 200-1500 meters. The annual average temperature was above 15 degrees, and the precipitation was above 1,000 millimeters. However, this could be done by watering. The annual frost-free period was about 250 days. This alone was impossible for Jiang Hai's manor. The soil had to be very fertile, but it also had to be very fertile sandy soil. If all the above requirements were met, about 25 stalks could be distributed in a year. In fact, to be honest, many families had made a fortune by raising this grass. For example, Du Feimin's ranch was basically planted with this grass. It had to be admitted that this was the style of a nouveau riche. Of course, it was impossible to only plant one type of grass in a ranch, just like how people could not only eat one type of vegetable. This type of grass was the main pasture. In addition, there were many other types of pasture, such as ryegrass, sweet elephant grass, corn grass, alfalfa grass, and so on. In terms of grass alone, the pasture in Du Feimin's ranch was probably much better than the pasture in Jiang Hai's manor. Of course, this referred to the time before Jiang Hai's arrival. Now, the pasture in Jiang Hai's manor can be regarded as the best in the world. Seeing that Jiang Hai was very satisfied with his ranch, Du Feimin could not help but laugh. "Come, look at the cattle I prepared." They were not short of money. He also understood the principle that high investment equaled high income. As long as they could make money, they did not mind investing more. After looking at the ranch, grass, and trees, Jiang Hai followed Du Feimin to look at their cattle. However, after looking at them, Jiang Hai could not help but secretly scold him for being a prodigal. Jiang Hai was very confident in his pasture. In his opinion, the cattle that Du Feimin bought were Angus cattle and the like. Just these cattle alone, Jiang Hai was confident that he could use his pasture to raise about 5% of 5A grade beef. However, Du Feimin obviously did not think so. Therefore, the cattle he bought were really not ordinary cattle. Basically, Jiang Hai looked around. Most of the cattle here were Zyminthal and Charolais. According to the standard, these two cattle breeds were better than Angus cattle. Their crossbreeds were already considered the top cattle breeds in the country. In the country, the best cattle in the country were Lucy cattle. However, whether it was Charolais cattle or Zyminthal cattle, their crossbreeds in the country were 5 times more profitable than Lucy cattle in the country. Moreover, the cattle that Du Feimin bought were all purebred. Whether it was in terms of meat production, meat output, or quality, they were all better than Angus cattle, let alone domestic cattle. In addition to these cattle, Du Feimin also raised a batch of Japanese cattle. In addition, there were many camels and sheep here. It was obvious that Du Feimin really cared about this place. Looking at these animals in front of him, Jiang Hai could not help but nod to himself. He was no longer the Xiao Bai from a year ago. Now, he had his own opinions. Du Feimin's place was not his territory. Because he was the royal family of Dubai, occupying an oasis might not cost him much money. However, the cost of these cattle and sheep alone was probably not lower than the total price of his own manor. In other words, just buying these cattle and sheep alone might cost him more than $300 million. This was really not an ordinary amount of money. As he followed Du Feimin, he looked around and observed the situation of the ranch. To be honest, Jiang Hai did not have much to say, because the layout of this ranch was much better than his own manor. Whether it was the supporting facilities, the density of the guards, the quality of the grass, and so on, Jiang Hai could not even say a word. Compared to this ranch, Jiang Hai's ranch was much more unprofessional. After all, Jiang Hai himself came from an unorthodox background. Robbins Garcia and the others were not well-bred cowboys, so they did not know much about these things, let alone teach Jiang Hai. Therefore, after walking around here, Jiang Hai did not have much to say. "Your place is very good. I don't have any opinions. When are you going to come to my place to gather grass?" After looking around and confirming that there was no room for him to say anything, Jiang Hai said to Du Feimin, because he really did not know what to say, "As soon as possible. When is it convenient for you?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin smiled. In fact, he invited Jiang Hai here mainly to let Jiang Hai see if his ranch and Jiang Hai's grass were compatible. If there was any conflict, it would be troublesome. In fact, he was thinking too much. Jianghai's grass was compatible with everything. If a person ate it, there would only be benefits, not to mention cows. Then let's do it at the beginning of March. At that time, the snow in Winthrop will melt, and it will be easier to gather grass. After I come to your place, I will have to go back to Huaxia. It may take more than a month before I go back. At the beginning of March, I will be back. At that time, you can come to gather grass. He calculated the time in his heart. The beginning of March was a good time. At that time, the grass in his manor that was tied up but not eaten by the cows could be sold to Du Feynman. At that time, he should also start fishing. Thinking about it, it was only during this period that he was relatively free. After he started fishing in the beginning of spring, he might be busy for a period of time again. I see. No problem. Hearing Jianghai's words, Du Feynman thought for a moment. This was acceptable. It would only take more than a month. He could try it himself. Without Jianghai's grass, he could raise cows very well. Your Highness Du Feynman. Just as Jianghai and Du Feynman were about to settle this matter, a voice suddenly came from afar. Hearing this voice, Jianghai and Du Feynman both looked over. They only saw that at this time, in the distance, a yellow man was being stopped by Du Feynman's bodyguard, and he was constantly shouting towards Du Feynman. Seeing this person, Du Feynman's face smiled. Then he waved to the bodyguard. The bodyguard saw that his master had spoken, so he let go of his hand, allowing the yellow man to quickly run over. Chapter 661. Your Highness. After the middle-aged man ran over, he glanced at Jianghai in front of him, but he did not greet him. Instead, Jianghai felt a trace of hostility from him, which made Jianghai somewhat puzzled. It seemed that he did not know this yellow-skinned man. After the yellow-skinned man glanced at Jianghai, he respectfully looked at Du Feynman and said with a serious face while stroking his chest, "Oh, Mr. Akita, may I know why you are looking for me?" Looking at the yellow-skinned man in front of him, Du Feynman said with a smile. Hearing him call this person's name, Jianghai also knew that this guy should be a Japanese. No wonder Jianghai felt a little unhappy when he saw him, but now that he was in Du Feynman's territory, Jianghai could not say much. After all, Du Feynman was different from him. He was the royal family of Dubai. Although he had some personal relations with him, it was impossible for him to overlook public affairs for personal reasons. Your Highness is too polite. Just call me Akita. I came here because I heard that His Highness Du Feynman invited a guest, so I came to have a look and discuss the situation of cattle raising. The guy called Akita said, while looking at Jianghai. From his eyes, it was not difficult for Jianghai to see that he was still very hostile to him, and the source of this hostility might be this ranch. I'm Akita Mango, the director of the Foreign Trade Bureau of Japan's Akita Corporation. I'm also one of the designers and builders of this ranch. I heard that Mr. Jiang is a kindred spirit, so I'd like to come and ask for advice. After saying that, Akita did not care about Du Feynman's ugly face and looked at Jianghai with a serious face. At the same time, he bowed to Jianghai, which was also the etiquette of Japan. Hearing his words, Jianghai touched his nose. This guy must be crazy. Forget about asking for advice, because I don't know anything about ranching. I don't know anything about farming, from management to breeding. Well, maybe Jianghai didn't have any specialization. Other than spiritual energy, he didn't have any other specialties. Therefore, instead of being ridiculed for a while, it was better to tell the truth first. Hearing Jianghai's words, not only was Akita Makoto stunned for a moment, but even Du Feynman was stunned for a moment. Although Akita Makoto seemed to be brainless, his IQ was not low. Although Akita Corporation was not as powerful as Yasui or Mitsubishi in Japan, Akita Corporation was not as flashy in Japan. But in fact, this conglomerate was quite a capital group. They were Japan's #1 livestock export company. Otherwise, they would not be able to get in touch with Du Feynman. Japan's livestock industry was very famous around the world. In the beginning, Japan's animal husbandry wasn't very famous. After all, Japan's territory was only so small. Other than the places where people lived, the food grown on the island was really only enough to prevent the people from starving to death. Later, Japan changed its policy. They no longer grew a large amount of food, vegetables, and fruits in Japan. They changed to high-end sales. They only raised the best cattle and planted the best rice. They used the price difference to gain a foothold in the international farmers market. As for the food that ordinary people ate, it was all imported from Huaxia. This was because imported from Huaxia was much cheaper than in their own country. In fact, not only Japan, but South Korea was also the same. At this time, most of the vegetables and fruits in Japan and South Korea were imported from Huaxia's Lu province. Of course, their domestic requirements were very high. They couldn't be too big, too small, or ugly. Therefore, the price was much more expensive than those sold in China. Many people specialized in this business. Akita Corporation was one of the leaders in Japan's livestock industry. Akita Makoto could be considered as the family head of Akita Corporation. However, it was not a very important family head. Although his surname was Akita, he did not have shares or inheritance rights. This time, he was the one who proposed to be on good terms with Du Feynman. Even those Wagyu cattle were brought over by him. He already knew about the relationship between Du Feynman and Jiang Hai, but he believed that he would definitely be more favored by Du Feynman than Jiang Hai, this lucky upstart. After all, he was a professional. In his opinion, Jiang Hai was just a lucky upstart, nothing more. He didn't know what kind of black technology he used, or what kind of shameless technology. Jiang Hai's cattle were sold at high price, and even beat a Japanese animal husbandry company. But Akita was not the same as the company he defeated. They were the best company in Japan. Whether it was the company or the individual, he did not think that he would lose to Jiang Hai. So don't look at how he came here so rashly. In fact, he had thought it through carefully. He wanted to defeat Jiang Hai at his proudest moment, expose the fact that he was a liar, and then make friends with Du Feynman. This way, not only would his company benefit, but his country would also benefit. He could even become a hero. When he thought of this, his eyes couldn't help but turn red. But what he didn't expect was that Jiang Hai would actually admit it. He wanted to compete with Jiang Hai to prove that Jiang Hai was a liar. But now, Jiang Hai directly said that he didn't know anything about business or farming. He was a liar, a dignified liar. This really made him speechless. You cough? You don't know anything about farming. What are you doing here? Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't play by the rules, Akita Masao almost couldn't breathe. He coughed, looked at Jiang Hai, and said with a serious face, "I'm here to play. Du Feynman is my friend." But after listening to his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with even more confusion. It was as if he was looking at a fool. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Akita Masao really didn't know what to say. He felt that his face was burning hot because he didn't know what to say. This was like a master inviting his friend to play in the house. But the servant in the house had to drag the guest to compete with him to see who could wipe the table clean. Thinking of this, Akita Masao couldn't help but open his mouth, then looked at Du Feynman. "Mr. Akita, if there's nothing else, you can go and rest. My friend and I still have to look around." Du Feynman couldn't help but chuckle as he looked at his blindfolded eyes. This guy's trying to embarrass me, right? So arrogant. I'm really sorry, I was rude. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Akita Masao was completely confused. Although Du Feynman didn't say anything too harsh, he could hear that this guy was a little unhappy. So he immediately bent down and bowed to Du Feynman and Jiang Hai, then quickly left. He had to go back and think about what was going on with Jiang Hai. Seeing Akita Masao leave, Jiang Hai looked at Du Feynman and said somewhat speechlessly, "Your manor was built by the Japanese? I know that you Huaxia people don't like the Japanese, so I originally want to find an American company or an Australian company to build this ranch. Although Huaxia's company is cheap, they don't have much experience in this area, but my cousin found them. He is the chief, so he can do whatever he wants." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman shrugged. He thought that Jiang Hai was angry. However, when Jiang Hai heard his words, he shook his head. He didn't mind these things because he knew that there was no top-notch ranch in the country. In China, most people didn't know that beef still had to be graded. Beef still had to be divided into portions. The difference between lean meat, meat, and cucumber strips was really not known by many people. In China, it was still stuck at the time of how much a cow was worth, and it wasn't divided according to grade. Therefore, it was inevitable that Du Feynman didn't look for Chinese people to build it. If it was Jiang Hai, he also wouldn't look for Chinese people to build it. In this aspect, the Japanese did have an advantage. Whether you admit it or not, the Japanese cattle was the best breed in the world. This was undeniable. The top breed in the country was the Lucy yellow cattle, but in the world, this breed was only at the bottom of the second class. It was indeed not a good breed, and in addition to the Japanese, there were many other countries that the Chinese hated. Britain, France, the United States, Germany, Russia, Japan, Italy, Austria, Prussia, and the Netherlands all invaded Huaxia, and the Huaxia people didn't like them. In addition, in recent years, the South Asian countries, South Korea, and India, these countries, Huaxia didn't like any of them. It can be said that according to the world map, except for North Korea and some West Asian countries, Huaxia was the enemy of the whole world. If Jiang Hai was really like an angry youth, why would he go to the United States? He would have done construction for the sake of social justice. Okay, I don't care about these things. We are friends, and I don't have shares in your ranch. How much do you want for the first batch of fodder? I'll call them back and let them prepare earlier. Waving his hand, Jiang Hai really didn't care about these small things. Looking at Du Feynman, he said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman thought for a moment. He couldn't bet all his treasures on Jiang Hai. Now, in this ranch, according to his initial request, there were a total of 2 million cattle, including 500,000 Charolais cattle, 500,000 Seminole cattle, 150,000 Japanese cattle, 30,000 dairy cows, and 20,000 other mixed cattle, 800,000 sheep, 50,000 alpacas, and some other things. If these guys all ate Jiang Hai's fodder, Jiang Hai might not be able to supply them. After all, it was still winter. Moreover, Du Feynman didn't want to use all of them, so in the end, he decided to pick out 50,000 cattle to eat the fodder that Jiang Hai sent over. 50,000 cattle, Jiang Hai could also bear it. He could also do an experiment first. It was quite convenient. Jiang Hai was a very casual person. Sometimes, business deals were settled just like that. After discussing the quantity of the first batch of fodder, Jiang Hai and the others continued to stroll around. They had to admit that strolling around the grassland in the desert was indeed a very enjoyable thing. After strolling around for a while, they returned to the residential area. There, Du Feynman specially held a party to welcome Jiang Hai. At the party, Jiang Hai saw Akita Masaaki for the second time, but this guy's hostility was deeper. In his opinion, Jiang Hai was an out-and-out bastard. On one hand, Jiang Hai told him that he didn't know how to manage or raise livestock, but on the other hand, he sold so much fodder to Du Feynman. It was the first time he knew that fodder was so valuable. Jiang Hai's fodder was about to be sold for the price of an ordinary cow. In his opinion, Jiang Hai was a liar who was fooling him. It was really too hateful, but there was no other way. Du Feynman trusted this liar, and he didn't know why it was like this. If he knew that Du Feynman and Jiang Hai actually had a billion-dollar jewelry and antiques business, perhaps he wouldn't think so. How much were those things? How much were those things worth? Although money was just a number for the rich, who didn't want this number to be higher. It could be said that the cooperation between Jiang Hai and Du Feynman was only the smallest one. A billion-dollar business was already done. What was a billion-dollar business? At least, Du Feynman believed in Jiang Hai very much. Regarding Akita Masaaki's hostility, Jiang Hai felt helpless and a little amused. This guy really took him seriously, but it was still the same sentence. After all, this was Du Feynman's territory. Jiang Hai couldn't say anything. However, if this guy dared to bark, then Jiang Hai didn't mind letting him have a taste of being beaten. When a dog barked at you, you really couldn't call it back, but you could hit it back. As for the severity of the beating, it would depend on his mood. If the beating was light, he would treat it as a lesson. If the beating was heavy and killed, then he would treat it as if he deserved it. After making dog meat hot pot, it would taste pretty good. After cutting a piece of authentic Arabian barbecue meat in front of him, Jiang Hai put it into his mouth and laughed. It seemed that he hadn't eaten dog meat for a while. Naturally, Jiang Hai wasn't a dog lover. He had a dog, so he didn't feel guilty about eating dog meat. But in the United States, no one ate dog meat. Usually, when he went back, no one would go to Zhongluo to eat dog meat. Now, dog meat restaurants were rare. But after a while, when he returned to Bing City, he could go there to eat dog meat. Even gods couldn't stand still. "Boss, what are you thinking about? Why are you so happy?" Looking at Jiang Hai eating meat and smiling happily, Azalina, who was sitting next to him, couldn't help but look at him strangely. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also reacted. Chapter 662. Oh, it's nothing. Azalina, have you eaten dog meat before? Jiang Hai smiled and shook his head, indicating that he was fine, and then said to Azalina. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina recalled her childhood. "I ate it when I was young. At that time, we trained all day, but the nutritious meals we ate tasted terrible. Then I and a few of my sisters stole the dog that the instructor often let out to bite us. We roasted it and ate it. To be honest, the taste was not very good." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina couldn't help but be immersed in her memories. She did not tell Jiang Hai about how hard it was when she was young. However, Jiang Hai has seen some special agent movies and the like. It's not an exaggeration to say that the training is asterisk, 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 asterisk. Soviet Russia has this tradition since a long time ago. This fighting nation is ruthless to the enemy and even more ruthless to themselves. So needless to say, Jiang Hai also knows what she went through when she was young. But at this time, he can't say anything to comfort her because it will make him seem hypocritical. Jiang Hai is not a hypocritical person, so although his heart skipped a beat, there is no other expression on his face. That's because he didn't eat good food. When we return to Bing City, I will take you to eat good food. Patting Azalina's shoulder, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina also laughed. But at this time, Jiang Hai's phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone and looked at it. It was an unfamiliar number. It can be said that it was the first time he saw it. This made Jiang Hai feel a little strange, but this ringtone lasted for a long time, which made Jiang Hai a little confused. After thinking for a while, he picked it up. What if it was someone he knew using someone else's phone? "Hello? Hello?" After picking up the phone, Jiang Hai said to the other side of the phone, "Hello, brother. Where are you?" After picking up the phone, a woman's voice came from the other side of the phone, but her way of calling made Jiang Hai confused. "Brother? When did I have a younger sister?" And this voice sounded a little unfamiliar. Did you call the wrong number?" After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai decided to explain. "Aren't you Jiang Hai?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman on the other side of the phone said with some doubts. Hearing this woman call his name, Jiang Hai can't help but be a little dumbfounded. He didn't recognize who this person is. "Yes, you are." Hearing the voice on the other side of the phone, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. "It's me, you." Hearing that Jiang Hai really couldn't recognize who she was, the female voice on the other side of the phone couldn't help but speak with some exasperation. "You." Hearing these two words, Jiang Hai was a little confused for a while. A trace of memory was recalled. Jiang Hai's mother's surname is He. When his mother was still alive, he also had a group of relatives, but after his mother passed away, Jiang Hai didn't have any contact with these relatives, and these relatives naturally didn't want to have any contact with him. Jiang Hai has 3 uncles and 1 aunt. This family has 5 daughters in total. It may be the old tradition of the Northeast that values boys over girls, but Jiang Hai is a nephew, so since he was a child, his uncles and aunts were not very good to Jiang Hai. When they grew up, they didn't have any contact. This Yu is the youngest daughter of Jiang Hai's uncle. She also has an elder sister, who is the same age as Jiang Hai and a few months older. Her name is He Feng. The second uncle's daughter is He Rui. The youngest uncle's daughter is He Yu, and the eldest aunt's daughter is Wen Jing. But this family, to be honest, is a bit snobbish. They originally didn't like Jiang Hai, not to mention after Jiang Hai's mother died. they disliked Jiang Hai even more. Of course, you can't expect others to be good to you. So Jiang Hai never complained about them. If they didn't want to be relatives, then they would be strangers. So no matter when Jiang Hai was good or bad, he never went to these relatives' houses. He just treated them as if they didn't exist. And they seemed to want this, but now they suddenly called Jiang Hai, which made Jiang Hai a little surprised. Oh, what's the matter? Although Jiang Hai doesn't want to acknowledge these relatives, he still has to ask. So he said to Hiyu, "It's like this. On the 27th of next month, it's my dad's 60th birthday party. Remember to come early." Hearing that Jiang Hai remembered her, Hiyu obviously didn't want to talk to this cousin who doesn't remember her anymore. She directly said to Jiang Hai, "Oh, I might not have time. I'm not in Bing City now." Hearing what Hiyu said, Jiang Hai told the truth. He really doesn't want to go. Not in Bing City? Where did you go? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Hiyu was also stunned for a moment and asked curiously, "I'm mainly in the United States now, but now I'm in Dubai. There is nothing to hide." So Jiang Hai said directly, "Hey, brother, I used to know that you were poor, but I didn't expect you to learn how to lie. The United States? Dubai? Haha, it's so funny." But after hearing the truth from Jiang Hai, Hiyu on the other side was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed. Hearing Hiyu's words and laughter, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Then the fire in his heart suddenly flared up, but it was extinguished in an instant. It was useless to talk to these people. It was indeed meaningless. Therefore, he just smiled. "Brother, if you don't want to come, just say it. We won't laugh at you for not having enough money to give a red packet. You don't have to find such a reason." Maybe she had enough of laughing. Hiyu on the other side said to Jiang Hai. The strong disdain in her words kept refreshing Jiang Hai's lowest point. "Well, actually, you're right. I just don't want to go. Tell Uncle and wish him a happy birthday." "Okay, I still have something to do here, so I'll hang up first." Shaking his head, Jiang Hai ignored the mocking laughter on the phone, said directly, and hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai quickly adjusted his mood and continued to eat. At this time, in Bing City, in a warm room, a family was talking and laughing. They looked at Hiyu, who walked in with a gloomy face. "How is it? Where is Xiao Hai? If he is at home, let him come over and drink now." An old man, sitting in the middle, said, "Well, it's not easy to define age now. 60 years old, you can say that you are an old man. You can also say that you are a middle-aged man. Here, you can say that you are an old man." This man is Jiang Hai's uncle, Huihua. Looking at his daughter who came in, Huihua's face was full of smiles as he said, "Sai, that eldest nephew of yours has no intention of coming here for a meal. He is doing well now. He is in the U.S. and Dubai." Hearing her father's words, Hiyu said with a sour face. Hearing what she said, the atmosphere in the room can't help but become a little awkward. Where did he go? Abroad? Hearing what his daughter said, Huihua asked with some doubts. "Yes, he said that he doesn't live in Bing City now. He lives in the United States and is now in Dubai. I haven't seen your nephew for 3 years, and he has learned nothing but bragging. We don't know his family situation. What's the point of bragging to us?" Looking at Huihua in front of her, Hiyu sat down and said with a sour face. In her opinion, Jiang Hai was bragging. "Okay, don't be angry. No matter what he said is true or not, when we get married, let's go to these 2 places. Do you want to go to Dubai or the United States?" Looking at Hiyu's expression, a man sitting next to her couldn't help but laugh and say. This man looked to be in his 30s. His clothes were not bad, but he exuded a wretched aura. This man is called Shangming. He is Hiyu's boyfriend, but he is not a good person. Hiyu did not go to university. She was a kindergarten teacher in high school. After graduation, her family used their connections to get her into a kindergarten. She is 6 years younger than Jiang Hai, 22 years old this year. Shangming is the parent of her student. He is 34 years old this year, older than her. He is a businessman and has some money. Then he hooked up with Hiyu, but Hiyu has to admit that Hiyu has some tricks up her sleeves. She took away Shangming's original wife, and they divorced. Now Shangming is devoted to Hiyu, although Hiyu's parents are not willing to do this. But children are like this, and they can't do anything about it. Fortunately, Shangming is rich, and Jiang Hai's uncle's family is also very observant. so they turn a blind eye to it. As for Hiyu, she has an elder sister, Hisya. Her husband is also a businessman. Hisya is 8 years older than Hiyu. Although she has a lot of bad habits, at least she has never had a child before and has never been married. I want to go to these 2 places. Hearing Xiangming's words, Hiyu here said with a smile, Okay, whatever you want. Hearing Hiyu's words, Xiangming also responded with a smile. Facing this girlfriend of his who was younger than him, Xiangming treasured her a lot. However, in the eyes of others, this kind of behavior was somewhat unsuitable for them. Or, I will call Jiang Hai again. Look at my little sister. She didn't say anything on the phone just now. Looking at Hiyu and Xiangming in front of her, Hisya hesitated and said to her father, Hiwei-hua, Okay, you go and call another one. Looking at Hiyu and Xiangming, Hiwei-hua sighed and said to Hisya. Then Hisya picked up her phone and went to the next room to call Jiang Hai. The phone was picked up not long after it rang. Hello, who is it? At this time, Jiang Hai, who was in Dubai, was also drunk. He just wanted to have a good meal. Why were there so many unmarked phone calls today? Can't you let me have a good meal? The phone call just now made his mood bad. He hoped that this one would be better. It's me, Hisya. You just said that you went abroad? Hearing Jiang Hai's voice, Hisya's voice also came from the other side of the phone. After hearing that it was Hisya, Jiang Hai was a little silent. Because Hisya and Jiang Hai were only a few months apart, it could be said that the 2 grew up together. Before Jiang Hai was 17 or 18 years old, which was 10 years ago, the relationship between the 2 was quite good. But since Hisya graduated from high school and started to work, the 2 gradually lost contact. However, after all, they grew up together. She and Jiang Hai had a good relationship. When Jiang Hai's mother passed away, she didn't take any money. Of course, she didn't have much money, but she still helped a lot. In Jiang Hai's heart, there was still a trace of affection for this sister. At least when he needed help, she didn't pay, but she did put an effort. Oh, it's Sister Xia. Yes, I left last year. I went to Boston in the U.S. I opened a manor there and raised cows and fish. I have to find something for myself to do. Hearing Hixia's voice, Jiang Hai's attitude became better. Oh, there? That's good. You're not young anymore. You should have something to do. It's still the same thing. My father's 60th birthday is on the 27th of next month. Will you be in Bing City or the U.S.? I heard that you're in Dubai. When are you going to leave? Are you not coming back for the new year? Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Hisya did not question Jiang Hai. Instead, she continued to talk to Jiang Hai. In fact, she believed a little now. But she only believed that Jiang Hai had gone to the U.S. As for what he was going to do there, it was another story. This was because it was not hard to find out about this. I'm in Dubai now. I have a friend who opened a ranch here and raised some cows. I am here to help out and will not be staying for a few days. I should be going back during the new year. But to be honest, I don't really want to go. After the new year, I need to pick a date to move my parents' graves. I don't know if there will be any conflicts at that time. Listening to Hisya's voice, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and told her about his arrangement. To be honest, he didn't want to go. This was actually quite an excuse, but Hisya seemed to want Jiang Hai to come. Aunt is moving her parents' graves? Let me know when you have time. I will go and help. Aunt treated me well in the past. I cannot miss this opportunity. However, after hearing Jiang Hai's arrangement, Hisya suddenly said. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai wanted to refuse, but he couldn't say it out loud. This matter was indeed better if there were more people and it was more lively. Thinking of his mother, who was really good to Hisya in the past, he hesitated for a moment. Jiang Hai also agreed. But thinking about it, when his parents moved their graves, when her father celebrated his birthday, it seemed that he really couldn't avoid it. Thinking about it gave him a headache. To be honest, Jiang Hai did not want to interact with his relatives. But sometimes, he had to interact with them. It was really troublesome. Chapter 663. What's wrong? Seeing Jiang Hai remain silent after hanging up the phone, Azalina looked at Jiang Hai and asked curiously. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai looked at Azalina, smiled helplessly, and said to her, Nothing, I just feel that it might be a little troublesome. Troublesome? Do you need me to deal with it? Hearing Jiang Hai say Chibwa in English, forget about the pronunciation anyway, Azalina understood. That was the most important thing. Hearing Jiang Hai say that there was trouble, she made a throat-slitting gesture. No, you're too cruel. I'm talking about my family. I thought I wouldn't have any interaction with them anymore, but I didn't expect there to be something else. Looking at her, Jiang Hai couldn't help but wave his hand immediately. What a joke. He was just going to attend a birthday banquet. He didn't need to kill anyone. Oh, I see. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina chose to shut her mouth. Since he didn't need her, it had nothing to do with her. Jiang Hai sat helplessly on the bench at this time. He really didn't know how to face his relatives. Speaking of which, Jiang Hai was not afraid of you being unreasonable, not afraid of you being tough, and not afraid of you flattering him with ulterior motives. If you were unreasonable to him, he would be even more unreasonable than you. If you were tough to him, he would be even tougher than you. If you flattered him, he wouldn't care. He was afraid that others would be nice to him. He was like this. Maybe it was because he lacked love in the past. If you gave him a drop of water, he would repay it with a gushing spring. For example, when you called at the beginning, Jiang Hai could completely tell her, I don't want to go. I'll hang up on you. But facing He Xia, he really couldn't say that. Putting himself in He Xia's shoes, he was a person who lacked love. I hope there won't be any complications this time. Rubbing his temples, Jiang Hai sighed and muttered in a low voice. While he was troubled by this matter, Akita Mako, who was opposite him, was staring at him. It was said that people of the same trade were enemies. This was not an exaggeration at all. Although Jiang Hai had never thought that he was in the same trade as Akita Shingo, his perspective was much higher than his. He did not mean to oppose this guy, but this guy did not think so. Originally, after Jiang Hai denied that he was in this line of work, his hostility towards Jiang Hai had decreased a lot. However, after he learned that Jiang Hai had sold another batch of grass to Du Feimin, in his eyes, this Jiang Hai was a shameful villain. He had 1,000,000% confidence in the Akita Corporation. If Jiang Hai came to compete openly, then they would have nothing to say. It was not shameful to lose. Perhaps the people of Japan were very shameless, but they could still afford to lose to Jiang Hai, a person from the United States. However, Jiang Hai's move was a little embarrassing. No, it was not just a little embarrassing, it was quite embarrassing. Akita-kun, this Jiang Hai is so shameless. Why don't we expose him and let His Highness Du Feimin put us in an even more important position? Seeing that Akita Shingo had been staring at Jiang Hai, another Japanese whispered beside him. No, Ino-kun, it's useless even if we go and talk about it, because we don't know what he said to His Highness Du Feimin. His Highness Du Feimin trusts him very much. If we just talk about it without any evidence, it's very difficult to shake his position in His Highness Du Feimin's heart. Therefore, we have to think of some other methods. Akita Jinwu whispered as he glanced at Ino-kun beside him and drank his sake. All is fair in war. This person also taught you a lesson. This guy can make His Highness Du Feimin trust him so much with just his mouth. He should have learned Hua Xia's way of making alliances. I heard that he was also involved in the high-speed railway project that Hua Xia opened here last time. This young man should not be underestimated. At this time, an old Japanese man sitting in the back had a flash of light in his eyes, but it disappeared soon after. Then, he slowly spoke as if he didn't care at all. Hearing his words, Akita Shingo and Ino-kun, who were sitting in front, couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai. They just thought that this guy was a liar, but they didn't expect that this guy was not an ordinary liar. If Jiang Hai knew what they were thinking, he would probably be confused. They had to admit that sometimes people were most concerned about being smart. They had made a total of 3 mistakes. First, Jiang Hai really wasn't playing any tricks because he really didn't know how to manage and breed. He just directly used the best 5A grade beef as a stepping stone. Breeding was Robbins Garcia's business. When Jiang Hai was bored, he just put some spiritual energy in the water and watered the ground. That was all. Second, Jiang Hai didn't know how to make alliances. They were treating him as Su Qin and Zhang Yi. What a joke. Although Jiang Hai's current brain development was extremely high. To be honest, he didn't use it. For example, he used 2% of his brain in the past and developed 5%. Now, it was 20%, but he still used the same 2%. At most, it was 5%. That was all. Jiang Hai was a very lazy person, and the laziness he showed was that he was too lazy to think about things. That was how he got lazy. What alliances? It was all the way back to the pre-Qin era. Jiang Hai had to admit that these people thought too much. Maybe if they said more, Jiang Hai wouldn't understand. Third, it got the order wrong. It was because Jiang Hai provided pasture that Du Feimin raised cattle. It was not because Du Feimin raised cattle that Jiang Hai provided pasture. This was a matter of principle. If Jiang Hai didn't sell pasture, they might not even have a job. However, these people didn't know this because it was considered a trade secret. Then what should we do now? Retracting his gaze from Jiang Hai, Akita Jinwu whispered to the old man behind him. This old man's name was Akita Masashi. Although on the surface, Akita Jinwu was the leader of the team, but in fact, the one who had the final say was his uncle. One must know that this time, whether it was the Akita family or the Japanese government, both of them were very interested in this business. Japan was sparse and had a large population. Natural resources were extremely scarce. Originally, the production of silver was very high, but it had long been gone. Now, Japan's metal and other things were all given to them by their big brother, the United States. So this time, they came to the Middle East with the hope of getting some oil from Middle East, but could they really get it? Wait, true gold is not afraid of fire. No matter how glib this person is, the quality of the pasture he provides will not change. As long as we check or prove that the pasture provided by Jiang Hai is just ordinary pasture, or if he added something else, then we can persuade Du Feimin. This is also the simplest way. Before that, there is no need to have any conflict with Jiang Hai. Picking up a piece of fish with chopsticks and putting it into his mouth, the old man said slowly while eating. Hearing the old man's words, Akita Jinwu was relieved. Having an old man at home was like having a treasure. If they had a conflict with Jiang Hai at this time, then Du Feimin was very likely to stand on Jiang Hai's side. Then, they would be passive. Instead of this, it was better to not take action and wait and see. As long as Jiang Hai was a liar, there would be a day when he would show his tail. As long as that day came, they could seize the opportunity and beat Jiang Hai into the abyss. Yes, hearing the old man's words, Akita Jinwu and Ino both responded together. In their opinion, Jiang Hai was bound to lose. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know this. He only knew that Akita Jinwu was no longer looking at him, which made him relax a lot. However, in Akita Jinwu's opinion, Jiang Hai was relaxed because he didn't seem to be looking at him. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but smile disdainfully. Jiang Hai was still too young. He didn't look at him now because he wanted to pull him down from the altar once and for all in the future. However, even if Jiang Hai knew his thoughts, he probably wouldn't care. He really wanted to see what this guy would look like after inspecting his own forage. It would definitely be wonderful. Over the next few days, Jiang Hai imagined that the Akita family would come to find trouble with him, but that didn't happen. Every day, he and Du Feimin stayed in the ranch, looking at the cattle and sheep, looking at the pasture. To be honest, when Jiang Hai looked at such a large ranch, he was somewhat moved. If he had millions of cows, and the average price of a cow was $140,000, he could earn $140 billion a year. In other words, $140 billion? Well, Jiang Hai was just thinking about it. He could guarantee that if he raised so many cows and sold them at this price, he would never have a day of peace. Whether it was the American government or the Huaxia government, they would come looking for him. If they were polite, they would cooperate with him. If they weren't polite, they would directly force him to hand over the secret recipe, and they might even cut him up for research. After all, it was assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year. No matter which country it was, they would be eyeing this money. Definitely. Thus, for his own safety, Jiang Hai felt that it was better for him to keep a low profile and slowly make money. He didn't need to take too big a step, or he would pull his balls. He believed that with his annual income of over $1 billion. If he provoked people, he could deal with them with the $2 billion in oil futures in his hands. But he might not be able to do anything more than that. Protecting oneself was one of the most important things in this world. Ancestral Gragon was a legendary quasi-sage, but Jiang Hai wasn't. He didn't know why his scales had evolved into dragon scales. Let alone some spells, he couldn't even fly. For 2 days and 3 nights, Jiang Hai and Du Feimin stayed in the ranch. Jiang Hai discovered that Du Feimin didn't use a cowboy to herd the cattle, but instead, he used a helicopter to herd the cattle. At the same time, 5 helicopters took off and flew at a low altitude to herd the cattle within a certain range. Although the sound was a bit loud, the cows looked quite gentle. Tycoons herding cows were different from ordinary rich people like Jiang Hai and the others. After visiting for 2 days, Jiang Hai and the others rested there for the night. The next morning, they took a car and left the ranch. Of course, on the way back, Jiang Hai almost vomited. The desert was really shaking, not at all lower than the waves on the sea. After returning to Dubai, Jiang Hai rested for the night. The next day, he bought a lot of things, mainly souvenirs. What souvenirs were there in Dubai? In fact, there were only 2 kinds of souvenirs that needed to be brought. One was saffron, and the other was gold. For once, Jiang Hai was a tycoon. According to the number of people, each person got a pile of gold jewelry, and there was also a lot of saffron, including the luxury clothes, bags, and so on that Jiang Hai sent back after he finished shopping. He spent almost $2 million on this trip to Dubai, not including the plane ticket. Of course, for Jiang Hai, this was just a drop in the bucket. His cows had already earned so much. He believed that his fish would earn even more, and even more. After all, he was born with a lot of good fish, such as the bluefin golden spear in the fishery, the large yellow croaker, the Yangtze River grenadier, and the Chinese bahaba that he cultivated, plus the salmon, tiger spots, king crabs, dragon crab, lobster. He could almost see Franklin waving at him. After a round of shopping, Jiang Hai and Azalina boarded the plane back to the imperial capital. Compared to when he went, it was much cheaper when he came back. The official cabin only cost 20,000 yuan, and that was including tax. The first-class cabin that Jiang Hai bought was about 50,000 yuan, which was much cheaper than when he came, but the flight time was also much shorter, only about 7 hours. They got on the plane in the morning and were about to arrive in the evening. When a plane landed at the capital airport, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stretch again. To be honest, flying was really tiring. Firstly, the plane was very small, and he couldn't get up and move around casually. Secondly, it was always the same white clouds outside the window, and he really got tired of it. Fortunately, Jiang Hai was sitting in the first-class cabin, and he could still lie down and play games on the iPad. If he was sitting in the economy cabin, it would be very depressing. But fortunately, they finally arrived. After taking their luggage, Jiang Hai and Azalina deliberately changed into thicker clothes, which were actually the clothes they wore when they came from Boston, and then they left. When they walked out of the waiting hall, they saw 4 beautiful women at a glance. At this time, they were standing in the distance, shivering and laughing, waiting for them. These guys. Looking at the 4 beautiful women, Jiang Hai's face showed a warm smile. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.